Imagine a foggy London night where a brilliant violinist, Eleanor Vance, collapses on stage, poisoned, her Stradivarius hiding a deadly secret. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson dive into a web of clues, coded music sheets, a red silk scarf, a hidden passage, and a trail of betrayal. As they unravel a scandal buried in the orchestra, every note leads closer to a killer. Will they decode Eleanor's final melody before the curtain falls? Chapter 1. The Curtain. Falls, London, 1890. The night was cold, the kind that sank into your bones. Gas lamps flickered on Baker Street, their pale light barely cutting through the fog. Shadows stretched across the cobblestones, twisting like fingers, reaching for secrets. Inside 221B, the air was warm but heavy with the smell of pipe smoke and old leather. Sherlock Holmes sat by the fireplace, his long legs stretched out, his sharp eyes fixed on the flames. His violin lay on the table, untouched, its strings gleaming in the firelight. I, Dr. John Watson, sat across from him, my notebook open, pen scratching as I tried to record our latest cases. The room was a mess, books piled on chairs, papers scattered on the floor, a half-empty teacup balanced on a stack of letters. It was home. Holmes hadn't spoken for an hour. His silence was a sign his mind was working, turning over some puzzle I couldn't see. "Watson," he said at last, his voice low and sharp, "do you ever wonder how many lies this city hides?" I looked up, startled. Holmes rarely asked questions like that. His mind was usually too busy with facts to bother with philosophy. Before I could answer, a knock shook the door, hard and fast, like someone was trying to break it down. Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, hurried in, her face pale as milk. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman here. Says it's life or death." Her hands twisted her apron into knots. Holmes waved her in, and a man stumbled into the room. He was tall, thin as a rail, with wild eyes and a coat caked in mud. His hands shook as he clutched a crumpled letter, his knuckles white. "Mr. Holmes, I'm Henry Carver, manager of the Royal Concert Hall." He gasped, his voice breaking. "You've got to help. There's been a murder." He swayed, grabbing the armchair to steady himself. His breath came in short, ragged bursts like he'd run all the way from the hall. Holmes's eyes lit up, sharp and hungry. "Sit, Mr. Carver. Tell me everything. Who is dead and why do you call it murder?" His voice was calm but firm, cutting through the man's panic like a knife. Carver collapsed into the chair, mopping his face with a handkerchief. "It's Eleanor Vance, our lead violinist. She collapsed on stage tonight right in the middle of her solo. The doctor says it was poison, but it can't be. She was fine before the performance. Someone did this, Mr. Holmes. Someone killed her." His voice rose, almost a shout, and he looked at us with desperate, pleading eyes. I set my notebook down, my heart thumping. A murder at the Royal Concert Hall? The place was a jewel of London, where the rich and powerful gathered to hear music that could make your soul ache. Holmes stood, already reaching for his coat. "Watson, get your medical bag. We're going to the scene. Mr. Carver, you'll come with us." The streets were wet, the rain turning the cobblestones slick and shiny. Our hansom cab rattled through, the fog, the horses' hooves clattering in the quiet. Carver sat across from us, still shaking, his hands twisting the letter like he could squeeze answers out of it. "Miss Vance was a genius," he said, his voice softer now. "Her music, it was like nothing else. She could make a whole room cry with one note. Who would want her dead?" Holmes stared out the window, his face unreadable. "That, Mr. Carver, is what we'll find out." His voice was cold, but I knew his mind was already racing, picking apart the problem like a watchmaker with a broken clock. The Royal Concert Hall rose ahead, its tall pillars glowing under the gaslights. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of perfume, wax, and something sharper, fear. The audience had been sent home, but the stage was still bright, the curtains open like a frozen moment. A single violin lay on the floor, its bow beside it as if dropped in a hurry. A few musicians stood in the wings whispering, their faces pale. A policeman guarded a shape under a white cloth, his face grim. Holmes knelt beside the body, lifting the cloth with care. Eleanor Vance was young, maybe 28, with dark hair spilling around her like ink. Her face was frozen in a grimace, her lips blue, her eyes wide and empty. Her fingers were curled, as if still reaching for her violin. I knelt too, checking her pulse. Nothing. Her skin was cold and a faint, bitter smell hung around her like burnt almonds. Cyanide, I said, meeting Holmes's eyes. It's fast. She'd have been dead in minutes. I looked at her hands, her neck, searching for marks, but there were none. Just that smell, sharp and deadly. Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning her body, the stage, the violin. He spotted something. A small glass vial half hidden under her skirt. He picked it up with a handkerchief, holding it to the light. It was empty, but the same bitter smell clung to it. Curious, he murmured, slipping it into his pocket. He stood, pacing the stage, his boots clicking on the polished wood. Every step was deliberate, his eyes darting from the floor to the curtains to the music stand. Carver, he said, turning to the manager. When did Miss Vance last eat or drink? Who was near her before she collapsed? Carver wiped his brow, again his handkerchief damp. She had tea in her dressing room about an hour before the show. Her maid Clara brought it. Eleanor liked to be alone before performing, to practice. No one else went in, well, except maybe Mr. Lyle, the conductor. He stopped by to talk about the music. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And this vial? Was it hers? Carver shook his head. I've never seen it. She didn't take medicines. Not that I knew. She was healthy, always full of life. I watched Holmes as he moved, his mind a machine, sorting clues like cards. He picked up the violin, turning it over, checking the strings, the wood, the bridge. Then he moved to the music stand where a single sheet of music lay. It was handwritten, with strange markings in the margins. Numbers, not musical notes. He studied it for a moment, then folded it and tucked it into his coat. Watson, he said, check the dressing room. Look for anything odd, anything that doesn't belong. I nodded, heading backstage. The dressing room was small but elegant, with a mirror framed in gold, a wooden table, and a wardrobe stuffed with silk gowns. A teacup sat on the table, half full, the tea cold and dark. I sniffed it, nothing but tea, no trace of poison. But under the table, caught in a crack in the floor, was a scrap of paper torn and smudged. It read, "Meet me at 10. Trust no one." The words sent a chill through me. I slipped it into my pocket to show Holmes. Back on stage, Holmes was talking to Mr. Lyle, the conductor. Lyle was tall, with a thick beard and eyes that didn't quite meet yours. I only spoke to Eleanor about the tempo, he said, his voice steady but his hands fidgeting. She was nervous, but she always was before a big performance. Holmes tilted his head. Nervous or afraid? He asked, his voice sharp. Lyle blinked, his mouth opening, then closing. He said nothing. Holmes turned to Carver. Who else? Was close to Miss Vance? Friends, rivals, anyone with a grudge? Carver hesitated, his eyes darting to the musicians in the wings. Eleanor kept to herself. She was private. But there was talk. Some in the orchestra didn't like her. She was the best, and they knew it. It made them jealous. Mr. Dutton, the second violinist, he and Eleanor had a fight last week. Something about her solo taking too much attention. Holmes's lips twitched, almost a smile. Jealousy is a strong motive. Watson, what did you find? I handed him the scrap of paper. He read it, his eyes gleaming. A meeting and a warning. Very curious. He turned to the policeman. No one leaves this hall until I've spoken to them. Seal the doors. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Holmes questioned everyone, musicians, stagehands, even the cleaners. Most were shaken, some crying, but no one admitted to seeing anything strange. Clara, the maid, swore the tea was fresh, made by her own hands. She was a small woman, nervous, her eyes red from tears. Dutton, the second violinist, was different, gruff, with a scowl that didn't fade. It was just an argument, he said when Holmes pressed him. Nothing worth killing over. Holmes listened, his face blank, but I could tell he was storing every word, every glance. By dawn, we were back at Baker Street. The fire had died, leaving the room cold. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him like a ghost. He pulled out the sheet of music, spreading it on the table. "Watson," he said, "this case is like a song, and we've only heard the opening notes. The viol, the T, the note, these markings. They're pieces of a bigger picture. Someone wanted Eleanor Vance dead, and not just to silence her music." I sank into my chair, tired but hooked. "Who do you think did it?" I asked. Holmes blew out a cloud of smoke, his eyes distant. "Everyone's a suspect until I prove they're not." He tapped the music sheet. "This is the key. Tomorrow, we start unraveling it." The room grew quiet, the only sound the faint crackle of the pipe. Outside, London was waking up, but in 221B, the mystery of Eleanor Vance's death hung over us like a storm cloud. I knew Holmes wouldn't rest until he'd found the truth, and I'd be right there with him, chasing it through the shadows. Chapter 2. A cry in the night dawn broke over London, gray and heavy, the fog wrapping Baker Street in a damp shroud. The air inside 221B smelled of stale coffee, pipe smoke, and the faint must of old books. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the breakfast table, my pen idle, my thoughts stuck on the concert hall, the fallen violin, the empty vial, the bitter scent of cyanide. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, his lean frame a shadow against the murky light. He held the music sheet from Eleanor Vance's stand, his eyes locked on the odd numbers scribbled in the margins. 3, 7, 12, like secrets waiting to be cracked. His violin lay untouched, its silence louder than any note. "Watson," he said, his voice sharp as a blade, "a crime is a story, and every story has a beginning. We're still missing the first line." His words hung in the air, heavy with purpose. I knew that look. His mind was a machine, grinding through clues, chasing patterns I couldn't see. Before I could respond, a soft knock came, followed by Mrs. Hudson's worried face. "Mr. Holmes, a young lady's here. She's in tears. Says it's about Miss Vance." Her hands twisted her apron, her eyes wide. Holmes set the music sheet down, his movements quick. "Bring her in." Clara Brooks stepped into the room, a slight figure in a worn black dress. She was young, no more than 20, with pale cheeks and eyes swollen from crying. Her hands clutched a handkerchief, soggy and frayed. She stood frozen, trembling, as if the weight of her words might crush her. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she whispered. "I'm Eleanor's maid. I heard something last night, before she died. I should have told you, but I was too scared." Her voice broke, and she pressed the handkerchief to her face. Holmes gestured to a chair, his voice calm but firm. "Sit, Miss Brooks. Tell us exactly what you heard and when. Leave nothing out." I grabbed my notebook, my pen ready, as Clara sank into the chair, her hands shaking. "It was before the show," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 30 minutes before Miss Eleanor went on stage. I brought her tea like I always did to her dressing room. She was playing her violin, practicing her solo. I left the tray and went to the costume room down the hall to fold some gowns. Then I heard her voice, sharp, angry. She was talking to someone, a man, I think. His voice was low, hard to hear, but she shouted, and then there was a cry, like she was in pain. I ran to the door, my heart pounding, but it was quiet again. I knocked, and she called out. Told me to go away, said she was fine. Clara's tears spilled over. I should have gone in. Maybe I could have saved her. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes piercing. This man's voice, could you place it? Was it Mr. Lyle, the conductor, or Mr. Dutton, the second violinist? His tone was steady, but I could see the spark in his eyes, the hunger for answers. Clara shook her head, her hair falling loose. I don't know, it was too muffled, just a deep sound. But Miss Eleanor, she sounded scared. She never raised her voice, not like that. She clutched her handkerchief tighter, her knuckles white. I scribbled notes, my mind racing. A cry, a man's voice, a frightened woman. Had Eleanor known her killer was close? Holmes tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair, a sign his thoughts were spinning. Miss Brooks, did you see anyone leave the dressing room after this cry? No. she said, her voice small. The hallway was empty. I stayed nearby, folding costumes until she went on stage. She looked pale, her hands shaking, but she didn't say a word. Just took her violin and walked out. Clara's sobs broke through, and she buried her face in her hands. Holmes stood, pacing the room, his boots clicking on the floor. "You've done well, Miss Brooks. This is valuable. Watson, we're going back to the concert hall. The dressing room holds more than we've seen." He grabbed his coat, his movement swift like a hawk ready to strike. The cab ride through London's fog was silent, the air thick and cold. Clara stayed behind, too shaken to join us, but her story clung to me like damp wool. A shout, a cry, a silent hallway. What had happened in those moments? I glanced at Holmes, but his face was a mask, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his mind already at the scene. The Royal Concert Hall stood quiet, its grand pillars dulled by the fog. Inside, the stage was dark, the violin still lying where Eleanor had dropped it, a lonely relic of the night before. The policeman on guard nodded, his face weary. "Nothing's been touched, Mr. Holmes, as you said." Holmes ignored him, striding toward the dressing room with purpose. The room was small, elegant, untouched since my last visit. The mirror gleamed, the wardrobe overflowed with silk gowns, and the teacup sat on the table, its contents cold. Holmes moved like a hunter, his eyes everywhere. He knelt by the table, running his fingers along the floorboards. "Watson, here." He pointed to a faint scratch, fresh and shallow, the wood lighter where it had been scraped. "A chair?" I asked, crouching beside him. "No," Holmes said, his voice low. "Too thin." "A shoe, or perhaps the edge of a case." He stood, checking the wardrobe, the mirror, the walls. He tapped the mirror's frame, listening for hollow spots, but found nothing. Then he lifted the teacup, sniffing it, dipping a finger, to taste the tea. I flinched. Cyanide was deadly, but he only frowned. "No poison here," he said. "The vial is still our best clue." He moved to the door, inspecting the lock. It was simple, no scratches or marks. Clara heard a man's voice, yet no one was seen leaving, he murmured. He stepped into the hallway, narrow and lined with doors to other rooms. At the far end was a small window, barely wide enough for a boy to slip through. Holmes opened it, leaning out. Below was an alley, wet and cluttered with broken crates and rubbish. "A way out?" I asked. "Doubtful," Holmes said, closing the window. "Too small for most men and the drop steep, but we'll keep it in mind." He paced the hallway, his eyes scanning every inch, then returned to the dressing room. "The cry is the heart of this. Eleanor was alive after it, so it wasn't her death. But it was something, a threat, a warning, a struggle." We moved to the stage, where the violin lay like a fallen bird. Holmes picked it up, turning it over, checking the strings, the bridge, the wood. He plucked a string, the note sharp and mournful. "This was her voice," he said softly. "Her music. Made enemies, Watson. Genius always does." He examined the bow, the rosin, the case, but found nothing new. The music stand was empty, the coded sheet safe in his pocket. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the music sheet on the table, his pipe sending smoke curling toward the ceiling. "These numbers, Watson, they're not musical. They're a code, a message hidden in plain sight." He traced the markings, 3, 7, 12 scattered among the notes. "They don't match the rhythm or key, it's something else entirely." I leaned over, studying the paper. "From the killer or Eleanor?" "Either," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "She may have known danger was near, or someone left this for us to find." He sat back, puffing his pipe. "The cry, the vial, the tea, the code, they're threads in a tapestry. We need more to see the pattern." The day dragged on, Holmes lost in thought, his fingers tapping the music sheet. I tried to write, but my mind kept circling back to Clara's words, a shout, a cry, a silent hallway. Eleanor Vance's death was no accident, and her killer was still out there, hiding in London's fog. As the light faded, I felt a chill. This was only the second note in Holmes's symphony, and the music was growing darker. Chapter 3. The Stradivarius Secret. The fog hung thick over Baker Street, turning the gas lamps into hazy glows. Inside 221B, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of tobacco, and the faint tang of coffee gone cold. I, Dr. John Watson, sat by the A fire, my notebook open but untouched, my mind still tangled in the mystery of Eleanor Vance's death. The violin, the viol, Clara's story of a cry in the night. They spun in my head like a tune I couldn't catch. Sherlock Holmes stood at his desk, the music sheet from the concert hall spread before him. Those strange numbers, 3, 7, 12, stared back, mocking us. He hadn't spoken in hours, his eyes narrow, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling. "Watson," he said at last, his voice sharp, "a puzzle is only as good as its pieces. We have some, but not enough." He tapped the music sheet, his fingers restless. "This code holds answers, but it needs context. We need to know more about Eleanor Vance and her violin." A knock interrupted, soft but urgent. Mrs. Hudson poked her head in, her face tight with worry. "Mr. Holmes, there's a man here. Says he's from the concert hall, something about Miss Vance's instrument." Her hands twisted her apron, a habit when she sensed trouble. Holmes's eyes lit up. "Show him in." A moment later, a short, wiry man stepped into the room. He was older, with gray hair and a face creased like old leather. His coat was patched, but his hands were steady, marked with the calluses of a craftsman. He carried a small wooden case polished to a shine. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice low and rough. "I'm Thomas Reed, luthier for the Royal Concert Hall. I tended Miss Vance's violin. I heard what happened and I had to come." He set the case down, his fingers lingering on it as if it held something sacred. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Mr. Reed, you're here about the Stradivarius, I presume? Speak plainly. What do you know?" His tone was calm but carried an edge, like a blade hidden in silk. Reed swallowed, glancing at me, then back to Holmes. "Miss Eleanor's violin, it was no ordinary instrument. A Stradivarius made in 1715, one of the finest ever crafted. She called it her soul. But there's something you need to know. That violin, it's got secrets." His voice dropped, and he leaned closer. "I checked it after she died when they brought it to my shop. There's a hidden compartment in the body, small, carved into the wood. I found it by chance years ago when I repaired a crack. Miss Eleanor didn't know, I swear, but someone else might have." Holmes's eyes gleamed, like a hound catching a scent. "A compartment? What was inside?" Reed shook his head. "Nothing now. But it was big enough for a small paper, maybe a key. I told no one, not even her. I thought it was just a quirk of the maker. But after she died, I wondered." He opened the case, revealing a violin that matched the one on the stage. Gleaming wood, taut strings, a faint scratch near the bridge. "This is it. I brought it for you to see." Holmes took the instrument, his fingers tracing its curves, with care. He turned it over, peering at the seams, then plucked a string, the note soft but clear. "Show me this compartment," he said, handing it back to Reed. The luthier pressed a spot near the F-hole, and a tiny panel clicked open, no bigger than a shilling. It was empty, the wood smooth inside. Holmes studied it, his face unreadable. "Watson, note this. A hidden space unknown to the owner, but possibly known to another. Curious." He turned to Reed. "Who else had access to this violin? Musicians, stagehands, anyone?" Reed frowned, thinking. "Miss Eleanor was careful with it. Kept it locked in its case when she wasn't playing. Only I handled it for repairs, and maybe Mr. Lyle, the conductor, when they discussed the music. Oh, and Mr. Dutton, the second violinist. He borrowed it once, said he wanted to study its tone. She wasn't happy about that." Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Jealousy over a violin, perhaps? Or something more? He set the instrument down. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, leave it with us. We'll return it when we're done." Reed hesitated, his hands hovering over the case. "Be careful, Mr. Holmes. That violin, it's worth more than most men's lives." He left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Holmes waited until the door closed, then turned to me. "Watson, we're going back to the concert hall. The violin is a clue, but the stage is the scene. We need to retrace Eleanor's final moments." He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin, his movements quick and sure. The cab ride was quiet, the fog thicker now, swallowing the city. The Royal Concert Hall loomed like a ghost, its pillars dim in the haze. Inside, the stage was untouched, the air still heavy with the memory of death. The policeman nodded, his face drawn. "All's as you left it, Mr. Holmes." Holmes ignored him, heading for the spot where Eleanor had fallen. He knelt, the violin in its case beside him, and studied the floor. "Watson, look here." He pointed to a faint mark, a smudge of rosin near the music stand. "She dropped her bow here, but the violin fell there." He gestured to where we'd found it, a few feet away. "Why? If she was poisoned, collapsing, why not drop them together?" I frowned, trying to picture it. She might have staggered, tried to hold on. "Perhaps," Holmes said, standing. He paced the stage, his eyes darting from the stand to the curtains to the wings. He stopped at the edge, where a narrow staircase led to the dressing rooms. Clara heard a cry, a man's voice, yet no one left. "This stage has secrets, Watson." He climbed the stairs, and I followed. In the dressing room, Holmes went straight to the wardrobe, rifling through the gowns. He checked the mirror again, then the table, lifting the teacup once more. "Still no poison here," he said, almost to himself. He knelt, peering under the table, and froze. "Watson, here." He pulled out a tiny sliver of wood, no bigger than a matchstick, stained dark. From the violin case, perhaps, or something else. I took it, turning it over. It smelled faintly of varnish, like the Stradivarius. "Could it have broken off when she fell?" I asked. Holmes shook his head. "It's too clean, no splintering, this was cut." He slipped it into his pocket, then turned to the door, checking the lock again. No forced entry. Whoever was here, she let them in, or they had a key. We returned to the stage where Holmes opened the violin case. He pressed the hidden compartment, studying it under the gaslight. Empty now, but what was it meant? To hold? A message? A threat? He closed it, his fingers lingering on the wood. "This violin was her life, Watson, and maybe her death." Back at Baker Street, the fire was low, the room cold. Holmes spread the music sheet on the table, the violin beside it. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question mark. The numbers, the compartment, the cry, they're connected. Eleanor Vance was no random victim. Someone knew her secrets, and that violin holds the key. I sank into my chair, my mind spinning. Dutton? Lyle? Someone else in the orchestra? Holmes exhaled, his eyes distant. All of them until we know more. The Stradivarius is a clue, but not the answer. Tomorrow we dig deeper, into Eleanor's past, her enemies, her music. He tapped the sheet. "This code will break, Watson. And when it does, we'll find our killer." The fog pressed against the windows, the city silent beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a shadow over us, her violin a silent witness. As Holmes stared at the music sheet, I felt the weight of the case. The truth was close, but still hidden, waiting in the dark. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Orchestra. The fog clung to London like a damp cloak, muffling the clatter of hooves and the cries of early vendors. Inside 221B Baker Street, the air was thick with the scent of pipe smoke and the faint bitterness of yesterday's coffee. I, Dr. John Watson, sat by the fire, my notebook open, my pen scratching half-formed thoughts about Eleanor Vance's death. The Stradivarius, its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, Clara's cry in the night, they swirled in my mind, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. Sherlock Holmes stood at his desk, the violin from the concert hall in his hands, his eyes tracing its polished curves. The music sheet lay beside it, those strange numbers, 3, 7, 12, taunting us like a locked door. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. "Envy is a poison as deadly as cyanide. We need to know who resented Eleanor Vance's brilliance." He set the violin down, his fingers lingering on its strings, as if they might whisper the truth. "The orchestra is a nest of ambition. Today, we hunt among its shadows." A knock broke the silence, firm but not frantic. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face creased with her usual worry. "Mr. Holmes, a gentleman from the concert hall, says he's got information, but he looks nervous." She twisted her apron, her eyes darting to the door. "Show him in," Holmes said, his tone crisp. A moment later, a man stepped into the room, middle-aged, with a thin mustache and a suit too tight for his frame. His hands fidgeted and his eyes flicked around as if expecting danger in our cluttered parlor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice tight. "I'm Edward Finch, first cellist at the Royal Concert Hall. I couldn't stay quiet. Not after what happened to Eleanor." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "There's talk in the orchestra. Things you should know." Holmes gestured to a chair, his eyes like a hawk's. "Sit, Mr. Finch. Speak plainly. What talk?" His voice was calm, but I knew that tone. It was a hook, pulling truth from reluctance. Finch perched on the edge of the chair, his hands clasped tight. Eleanor was a star, no question. Her solos filled the hall, brought tears to the audience. But not everyone loved her for it. Some, they hated how she shone. Mr. Dutton, the second violinist, he was the worst. He'd mutter about her stealing. The spotlight, how her Stradivarius gave her an edge. Last week I heard them argue backstage, sharp words, almost a fight. He said she didn't deserve her place. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. And others? Was Dutton alone in his resentment? Finch hesitated, glancing at me, then back to Holmes. Not alone. Miss Clara Henley, the flautist. She was quiet about it, but her eyes, they burned when Eleanor played. And Mr. Lyle, the conductor, he favored Eleanor, gave her every solo. Some thought he was too close to her, if you catch my meaning. There were whispers, ugly ones, about their connection. I scribbled notes, my heart quickening. Jealousy, ambition, rumors of scandal. This orchestra was a powder keg. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Whispers are often louder than truth, Mr. Finch. Did you see anything the night she died? Anything odd?" Finch's hands trembled. "I was in the pit playing, but before the show I saw Dutton near her dressing room. He looked angry, pacing like he was working up to something. I didn't think much of it then, but now—" He trailed off, his face pale. Holmes stood pacing the room, his boots clicking on the floor. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. You've given us a thread to pull. Stay in London. We may need you again." Finch nodded, almost tripping over the rug as he left, his nervous energy trailing behind him. Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight. "Watson, the orchestra is our stage now. Dutton's anger, Lyle's favoritism, Henley's envy. These are motives, but we need evidence. To the concert hall." The cab ride was cold, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. The Royal Concert Hall stood silent, its grandeur muted by the gray morning. Inside, the stage was as we'd left it, the violin's spot marked by a faint smudge of rosin. Holmes moved to the orchestra pit, his eyes scanning the chairs, the music stands, the shadows. "This is where they watched her shine," he said, his voice low. "And where some wished her gone." We found the stage manager, a gruff man named Harris, in a back office. He was sorting papers, his hands stained with ink. "Mr. Holmes," he said, barely looking up. "The hall's a mess since the murder. Musicians won't rehearse, audiences won't come. What do you want now?" Holmes's voice was sharp. "Access to the orchestra's records, schedules, payments, anything about Eleanor Vance. And I want to speak to Dutton and Henley now." Harris grumbled but handed over a ledger, its pages worn and smudged. Holmes flipped through it, his eyes darting over names and numbers. Interesting, he murmured. Eleanor was paid double the others for her solos. No wonder resentment brewed. Dutton was first, a lean man with a scowl etched into his face. His hands were calloused, his violin case clutched tight. "I didn't kill her," he said before Holmes could speak. "Yes," we argued. "She was arrogant, always taking the best parts, but I wouldn't poison her." Holmes tilted his head. "You were seen near her dressing room before the show. What were you doing?" Dutton's eyes flicked away. "I wanted to talk, that's all. About the next performance, she brushed me off, said she was busy." His voice was tight, his knuckles white on the case. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low. "You borrowed her Stradivarius once. Why?" Dutton flushed. "I wanted to try it, see if it was as good as she claimed it was." "So what?" He glared, but his hands shook. Clara Henley was next, a slight woman with sharp features and eyes that darted like a bird's. "I didn't hate Eleanor," she said, her voice clipped. "She was talented, yes, but so are others. The conductor, he only saw her." Her fingers twisted a silver bracelet, her movements quick and nervous. Holmes watched her closely. "Where were you before her performance?" "In the pit, tuning. My flute," she said too fast. "I saw nothing." But her eyes wouldn't meet his, and I noted it in my book. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the ledger and music sheet on the table, the violin beside them. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. "Watson, the orchestra is a web of envy and secrets. Dutton's anger, Henley's jealousy, Lyle's favoritism, they all point to motive. But the Stradivarius, its compartment, the code, these are the keys." I leaned over the ledger, spotting a note. Eleanor had been booked for a private recital the night she died after the main show. "Holmes, look at this. She was to meet someone at 10, same time as the note I found. Meet me at 10, trust no one." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A meeting, a cry, a death. The pieces are aligning, Watson. Tomorrow we follow this thread, to the private recital, and whoever waited for her." He tapped the music sheet, the numbers glowing in the firelight. "This code will break, and with it, the killer's mask." The fog pressed against the windows, the city a murmur beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a shadow over us, her violin a silent witness to betrayal. As Holmes stared at the code, I felt the weight of the case grow heavier. The truth was near, but it hid among the orchestra's shadows, waiting for us to find it. Chapter 5. Dr. Watson's Discovery. The fog over Baker Street was a thick veil, turning the gas lamps into faint smudges of light. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with the scent of pipe smoke, cold coffee, and the faint must of old books. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen scratching notes about Eleanor Vance's death, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cry Clara heard, the whispers of envy in the orchestra. My mind churned trying to piece it together, but the puzzle felt like a knot I couldn't untie. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the violin in his hands, his sharp eyes tracing its wood. The music sheet lay on the table, its numbers, 3, 12, staring up like a challenge. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and crisp, "a case like this is a shadow play. We see shapes but not the hand moving them. We need more light." He set the violin down, his fingers brushing the strings, and turned to the ledger from the concert hall, flipping through its pages with quick, precise movements. Before I could reply, a sharp knock rattled the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a boy outside. Says he's got something for you from the concert hall. He looks scared half to death." Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Bring him in." Moment later, a lad no older than 15 shuffled in. His cap pulled low, his clothes patched and damp from the fog. His hands clutched a small, crumpled envelope, sealed with wax. "Sirs," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm Tommy, errand boy at the hall. Someone told me to give you this, said it's about Miss Vance." He thrust the envelope at Holmes and stepped back, as if eager to run. Holmes took it, his fingers deftly breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet folded tight with a few lines scrawled in hasty ink. "Look to the doctor's bag. The truth lies where you least expect it." No signature, just those words, sharp and cryptic. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Interesting. Tommy, who gave you this?" The boy shuffled his feet. "Didn't see his face, sir. He was in the alley by the hall, wore a dark coat, hat pulled low, gave me a shilling to bring it here and not say a word." Tommy's eyes darted to the door and Holmes waved him off, slipping him a coin. The boy vanished into the fog. Holmes handed me the note. "Watson, your medical bag was with you at the concert hall. Did you notice anything odd?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were like knives, cutting through the mystery. I frowned, thinking back. I checked Eleanor's body, but I didn't open my bag after that. It was by my side the whole time. My heart quickened. Had someone tampered with it? "I'll check it now." I fetched my bag from the corner, its leather worn but familiar. I opened it, spreading the contents on the table: bandages, scissors, a stethoscope, vials of medicine. Everything seemed in place, but as I dug deeper, my fingers brushed something unfamiliar. A small, folded piece of cloth, tucked into a side pocket. I pulled it out, my breath catching. It was a handkerchief embroidered with the initials E.V., Eleanor Vance. A faint, bitter smell clung to it, like almonds. "Cyanide," I said, my voice tight. I handed it to Holmes, who held it to the light, his eyes narrowing. The cloth was stained, a faint yellow mark near the edge. "This wasn't in my bag before we went to the hall. Someone put it there." Holmes's face was unreadable, but his fingers moved fast, wrapping the handkerchief in his own to preserve it. "A bold move," he said. "Planting evidence in your bag, Watson, means our killer was close enough to touch your things, without notice." He paced the room, his boots clicking on the floor. "This changes the game. The note, the cloth, the violin, they're all threads in the same web." I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the thought of a killer so near. Who could have done it? The orchestra was on stage, the stagehands in the wings. My bag was near me the whole time. Holmes stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on the handkerchief. "Not the whole time, Watson. You left it briefly when you checked the dressing room. Someone saw their chance." He turned to the music sheet, tapping the numbers. "This code, the compartment, now this cloth, they're linked. Eleanor knew something or had something worth killing for." I sat back, my mind racing. The note said, "Trust no one." Was she warning us? Or was it the killer's taunt? Holmes's lips curved slightly. "Both, perhaps. We need to return to the hall, Watson. The stagehands, the musicians, someone saw more than they're saying." He grabbed his coat, the violin, and the music sheet, his movements swift. "Bring your bag. We'll retrace your steps." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray and shadow. The Royal Concert Hall stood like a tomb, its pillars cold under the gaslights. Inside, the stage was untouched, the air heavy with the ghost of Eleanor's final note. Holmes moved to the spot where I'd left my bag, near the orchestra pit. He knelt, studying the floor, then stood, his eyes scanning the wings, the curtains, the stairs. "Watson," he said, "you set your bag here while you examined the body, then took it to the dressing room, correct?" I nodded, and he pointed to a narrow gap between the curtains. Someone could have slipped through here unseen. The pit was chaos after Eleanor fell. Musicians talking, stagehands moving. A perfect moment to act. We questioned. The stagehands next, a rough lot with tired eyes and calloused hands. Most claimed they saw nothing, too busy with ropes and lights. But one, a young man named Ben, hesitated when Holmes pressed him. I saw someone near the doctor's bag," he admitted, his voice low. Didn't think much of it then. It was Mr. Lyle, the conductor. He was looking at the floor like he'd dropped something. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Lyle, interesting. Did he touch the bag? Ben shrugged. Couldn't say. It was quick and I was hauling a crate. He looked away, his face flushed. We found Lyle in his office, a small room cluttered with sheet music and batons. He was polishing a watch, his hands steady but his eyes wary. Mr. Holmes, he said, I've told you all I know. I spoke to Eleanor about the music, nothing more. Holmes leaned against the desk, his voice smooth. Yet you were seen near Dr. Watson's bag after her death, care to explain? Lyle's hand froze, the watch glinting. I was looking for my pen. It fell during the chaos. I didn't touch the bag. His voice was too quick, his eyes avoiding Holmes's. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the handkerchief, the music sheet, and the violin on the table. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a warning. Watson, your discovery is a pivot. The handkerchief ties Eleanor to the poison, and its placement in your bag points to someone close. Lyle, perhaps, or another with access. The code, the compartment, the cry, they're all part of the same song. I sank into my chair, the weight of it sinking in. Lyle's lying, isn't he? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Someone is. Tomorrow we press harder into Eleanor's life, her secrets, and that private recital. The truth is, there, Watson, waiting in the shadows. The fog pressed against the windows, the city silent. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and my bag had carried a piece of it. As Holmes studied the code, I felt the case tightening around us. Its secrets, closer but still out of reach. Chapter 6. The Chemist's Clue. The morning fog draped Baker Street in a heavy gray shroud, dulling the clatter of carts and the cries of paperboys. Inside 221B, the air was thick with the scent of pipe smoke, stale tea, and the faint chemical tang of Holmes's experiments. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my thoughts tangled in the web of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the handkerchief in my bag, reeking of cyanide. Each clue was a thread, but the pattern eluded me. Sherlock Holmes stood by his workbench, the violin resting beside a clutter of vials and burners. He held the stained handkerchief, his eyes narrow, studying it under a magnifying glass. The music sheet lay nearby, its numbers, 3, 7, 12, mocking us like a locked safe. Watson, Holmes said, his voice sharp as a scalpel. Poison is a coward's weapon, but it leaves a trail. This handkerchief is a bold move, planted to mislead or accuse. We need to know its source. He set it down, his fingers precise, and turned to me. Today, we traced the cyanide. A sharp knock broke the quiet. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her apron twisted in her hands. Mr. Holmes, a man's here, a chemist, he says. Claims he knows something about Miss Vance's case. Her voice trembled, her eyes wide with unease. Holmes's gaze snapped to the door. Send him in. A moment later, a stout man entered, his coat dusted with soot, his hands stained with chemicals. He was middle-aged with a round face and glasses perched low on his nose. He carried a small leather satchel, gripping it tightly. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he said, his voice steady but nervous. I'm George Hartley, chemist on Fleet Street. I read about Miss Vance's death in the papers, poisoned, they said. I think I know something. He glanced at me, then back to Holmes, his fingers twitching on the satchel. Holmes gestured to a chair. Sit, Mr. Hartley. Speak clearly. What do you know about the poison? His tone was calm, but his eyes were like hawks, missing nothing. Hartley sat, wiping his brow with a stained handkerchief. I run a small shop, sell medicines, chemicals, that sort. Last week a man came in asking for cyanide salts. Said he needed it for photography. Developing plates, you know. It's not unusual, but he was odd, nervous, kept his hat low, wouldn't meet my eyes. I sold him a small vial, but I wrote down his description, just in case. He pulled a crumpled notebook from his satchel, flipping to a page. Tall, thin, dark coat, scarf over his face. Spoke low, like he didn't want to be heard. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. When was this exactly? And did he give a name? Hartley checked his notes. 4 days ago, Thursday around noon. No name. Paid in cash. I thought, it's strange, but I've seen worse in London. He hesitated, then added, after the news about Miss Vance, I wondered if maybe it was the same poison. I scribbled in my notebook, my heart racing. Cyanide for photography was common, but the timing, the secrecy, it fit too well. Holmes took the chemist's notebook, scanning the description. This man, any other details? His hands, his walk, anything distinct? Hartley frowned, thinking. His hands were gloved, black leather. He walked quick, like he was in a hurry. Oh, and his scarf. It was red silk, a bit fancy for a photographer, I thought. He shifted, uneasy. That's all I remember. Holmes's lips twitched. A faint smile. You've done well, Mr. Hartley. Leave the notebook with us. We'll return it when we're done. Hartley nodded, setting the satchel down and hurrying out, as if glad to be free of the burden. Holmes turned to me, the notebook in hand. Watson, this is a thread worth pulling. A man buying cyanide days before Eleanor's death, hiding his face. It's no coincidence. We need to find this scarf wearer. He grabbed his coat, the violin, and the music sheet. To the concert. Hall first, then Fleet Street. The trail starts there. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold and silent. Inside, the stage was untouched, the air heavy with the memory of Eleanor's fall. Holmes moved to the orchestra, pit, his eyes scanning the chairs, the stands, the floor. The handkerchief was in your bag, Watson, but the cyanide came from somewhere. Let's see if our mysterious buyer left a mark. We searched the wings, the dressing rooms, the narrow hallways. In the costume room, among piles of gowns and props, I spotted something, a scrap of red silk caught on a splintered crate. I held it up, my breath catching. Holmes, look at this. It was soft, finely woven like the scarf Hartley described. Holmes took it, his eyes gleaming. Well done, Watson. This could be our man's, or a plant to mislead us. He sniffed it, then tucked it into his pocket. The costume room is near the dressing room, close enough for someone to slip in and out unseen. We questioned the stagehands again, focusing on the costume room. Most shook their heads, claiming ignorance, but a young girl, barely 16, hesitated. I saw a man there, night of the show, she said, her voice small. Tall, dark coat, scarf over his face. He was poking around, then left quick when I came in. Her name was Molly, a seamstress's apprentice, and her eyes were wide with fear. Holmes pressed her gently. Did he touch anything? The gowns, the props? Molly nodded. He was near the crates, where we keep extra fabric. Didn't see him. Take nothing, though. She twisted her hands, glancing at the door. Holmes thanked her, then led me to Fleet Street. Hartley's shop was small, its shelves crammed with bottles, powders, and strange-smelling liquids. The chemist was behind the counter polishing a glass vial. Back so soon, Mr. Holmes? He said, his voice wary. Holmes held up the red silk scrap. Recognize this? Hartley's eyes widened and he nodded. Looks like the scarf that man wore. Where'd you find it? At the concert hall, Holmes said. Tell me, Mr. Hartley, any other customers asking for cyanide recently? Or anyone lingering near your shop? Hartley shook his head. No one like that. Business as usual except for him. He pointed to his notebook still in Holmes's. And I've told you all I know. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the music sheet, the chemist's notebook. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a ghost. Watson, the cyanide trail is clear now. A man buys poison, hides his face, leaves a scarf in the costume room, and a handkerchief in your bag. It's deliberate, calculated. But why? I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. To frame someone? Or to hide the real poison's source? Holmes nodded, his eyes on the music sheet. Both, perhaps. The numbers, the compartment, the cry. Now this scarf. They're all notes in the same song. Eleanor's killer is close. Watson, and they're watching us. He tapped the sheet. Tomorrow we chase the man in the red scarf. He's the key to the code. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a murmur beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the chemist's clue had sharpened our path. As Holmes studied the numbers, I felt the case closing in, its secrets stirring in the shadows, waiting for us to strike. Chapter 7. A study in cyanide. The fog outside 221B Baker Street was a heavy curtain, swallowing the glow of gas lamps and muffling the distant clatter of London's morning. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp bite of chemicals, from Holmes's workbench, and the faint staleness of untouched tea. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen hovering over pages filled with notes on Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the handkerchief in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room. Each clue was a spark, but the fire of truth remained unlit. Sherlock Holmes stood by his workbench, the stained handkerchief under his magnifying glass, its faint almond-like scent a grim reminder of cyanide. The music sheet lay nearby, its numbers 3, 7, 12, stubbornly silent, like a locked diary. Watson, Holmes said, his voice sharp and clear. Cyanide is a swift killer, but its delivery is an art. The handkerchief, the vial, the tea, they're pieces of a careful plan. He set the glass down, his eyes gleaming with focus. We need to know how the poison reached Eleanor, and why it was hidden in your bag. He picked up the red silk scrap, twirling it between his fingers. This scarf is our guide. Today, we follow its trail. A knock broke the quiet, quick and nervous. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Holmes, a woman's here, says she's from the concert hall. Looks like she's seen a ghost. Her voice was tight, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes snapped to the door. Bring her in. A moment later, a woman stepped inside, tall, thin, with graying hair pulled tight and eyes that darted like a trapped bird's. She wore a plain dress, her hands clutching a small cloth bag. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she said, her voice trembling. I'm Margaret Poole, wardrobe mistress at the Royal Concert Hall. I found something in Miss Vance's things. I didn't know what to do, but I heard you were asking questions. She opened her bag, pulling out a small glass bottle, stoppered tight, with a faint yellow residue inside. The smell hit me at once. Bitter. Like almonds. Cyanide, I said, my heart racing. I reached for it, but Holmes was faster, taking it with his handkerchief, holding it to the light. The bottle was small, no bigger than a perfume vial with a scratched label, half torn. Holmes's gaze was sharp. Miss Poole, where did you find this? And when? His tone was calm, but it carried a weight that made her flinch. She swallowed, her hands twisting the bag. In the costume room yesterday after you left. It was tucked behind a stack of gowns in a corner no one checks. I thought it was perfume at first, but the smell. I knew it wasn't right. I remembered the papers saying Miss Vance was poisoned. And Her voice broke and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Holmes turned the bottle, studying the residue. This matches the vial from the stage, he said, almost to himself. But hidden in the costume room, why? And by whom? He looked at Margaret. Did anyone else know about this? Did you see anyone near those gowns before the show? Margaret shook her head. No one, not that I saw. The room's busy before a performance. Musicians, stagehands, all rushing about, but I didn't see anyone linger there. Her eyes were wide, pleading. I swear I didn't know it was there until yesterday. Holmes nodded, slipping the bottle into his pocket. You've done well, Miss Poole. Stay silent about this, and don't leave London. She nodded, her hands shaking, and hurried, out her footsteps fading down the stairs. Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight. Watson, this bottle is a gift. 2 vials of cyanide, one on the stage, one hidden. Our killer is careless or desperate. We need to test this residue and find its source. He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin. To the chemist, first, then back to the hall. The poison's path is clearer now. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a maze of shadows. Hartley's shop on Fleet Street was dim, its shelves packed with bottles and jars. George Hartley, the chemist, looked up from his counter, his glasses glinting. "Mr. Holmes back again?" he said, his voice cautious. Holmes held up the new vial. "Test this. I need to know if it matches the cyanide you sold last week." Hartley took it, his hands steady despite the surprise in his eyes. He set up a small burner, mixing reagents, the air filling with a sharp chemical smell. After a few minutes, he nodded. "It's the same. Potassium cyanide, pure, like what I sold to that man in the red scarf." Holmes's lips twitched. "And the bottle? Any marks to trace it?" Hartley peered at it. "Common enough, sold in dozens of shops. But this scratch on the label, it's odd, like it was scraped off on purpose. I'd say it came from a chemist, not a photographer's supply." He handed it back, his face pale. Holmes pocketed the vial. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Keep this quiet." We left, the fog thicker now, curling around us like a warning. At the concert hall, the stage was silent, the air heavy with dust and memory. Holmes moved to the costume room where Margaret had found the bottle. It was a cramped space filled with gowns, hats, and crates of fabric. He knelt by the corner she described, his fingers tracing the floor. "Watson, look." He pointed to a faint smudge barely visible, a trace of yellow powder like the residue in the vial. "Sloppy work," he said, scraping it into a small envelope. "The killer hid the bottle here but left a trail." He stood, scanning the room. This was no random act. Someone knew this corner was overlooked. We questioned the stagehands, again focusing on the costume room. Most shrugged, claiming they were too busy to notice anything. But Molly, the young seamstress, hesitated when Holmes asked about the man in the red scarf. "I told you I saw him," she said, her voice small. "Near the crates before the show. He was quick, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought he was just lost." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Did he carry anything? A bottle? A bag?" Molly bit her lip. "Maybe a small case, like for glasses. I couldn't see clear." Her hands twisted and Holmes let her go, his mind already elsewhere. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the 2 vials, the music sheet. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. "Watson, the cyanide is the heart of this. 2 vials, one on the stage, one hidden, both tied to the man in the red scarf. But why plant the handkerchief in your bag? To frame you or to distract us?" I leaned over the table, my mind racing. The scarf, the vials, the code, they're all connected to the concert hall. Could it be someone outside the orchestra? A patron, maybe? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the music sheet. Possible, but unlikely. The access, the timing, it points to someone inside, someone who knew Eleanor's habits, her violin, her dressing room. He tapped the numbers. "This code is the lock, Watson. The cyanide is the key. Tomorrow we hunt the man in the red scarf and the secret he's hiding." The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a shadow, and the chemist's clue had sharpened our focus. As Holmes studied the numbers, I felt the case tightening, its secrets stirring in the dark, waiting for us to uncover them. Chapter 8. The Maestro's Motive. The fog over Baker Street was a heavy blanket, dimming the gas lamps to mere flickers and muffling the early morning sounds of London. Inside 221B, the air was thick with the scent of pipe smoke, the sharp sting of chemicals, and the faint must of old books. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen scratching notes on Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cyanide-stained handkerchief in my bag, the red silk scrap, and the second vial found in the costume room. Each clue was a piece of a shattered mirror, reflecting fragments of truth, but no clear image. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the music sheet in one hand, the violin in its case nearby. His eyes were fixed on the numbers, 3, 7, 12, his mind a machine grinding through possibilities. "Watson," he said, his voice sharp and low. "A conductor controls the orchestra, but who controls the conductor? We need to know more about Mr. Lyle." He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping the table, a rhythm of restless thought. His favoritism toward Eleanor, his presence near your bag, his evasions, they point to a motive we haven't yet uncovered. A knock broke the silence, quick and heavy. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, a man's here, says he's from the concert hall. He looks angry, won't say why." Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Send him in." A moment later, a broad-shouldered man strode in, his face flushed, his beard neatly trimmed but his eyes burning with agitation. He wore a fine coat but his hands were clenched, betraying his calm facade. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice deep and clipped. "I'm Charles Lyle, conductor of the Royal Concert Hall. I heard you've been asking about me, poking into my affairs. I've nothing to hide, but I won't have my name dragged through the mud." He stood tall, but his hands twitched, betraying nerves. Holmes gestured to a chair, his tone smooth but firm. "Sit, Mr. Lyle. Your name is only as muddied as the truth allows. Tell us about your relationship with Eleanor Vance. The orchestra whispers of favoritism, perhaps more." His eyes locked onto Lyle's, unblinking like a predator sizing up prey. Lyle's face reddened, but he sat, his hands gripping the chair's arms. "Eleanor was my finest musician. Her talent was unmatched, and yes, I gave her solos. She earned them. The others, Dutton, Henley, they couldn't match her, and they hated her for it. But there was nothing improper between us, despite the gossip." His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked away, just for a moment. I scribbled notes, my heart quickening. Lyle's defensiveness was a crack in his armor. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "You were seen near Dr. Watson's bag after Eleanor's death. You claimed to be looking for a pen. A weak excuse, Mr. Lyle. What were you really doing?" Lyle's jaw tightened. "I told you I dropped my pen in the chaos. I was flustered. Eleanor had just collapsed. I didn't touch the doctor's bag." His voice rose, but his hands shook, betraying him. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "And the night of her death? You spoke to her in her dressing room, minutes before her performance." Clara heard a man's voice, a cry. "Was it yours?" Lyle's eyes widened, his face paling. I spoke to her, yes, about the tempo for her solo. She was nervous, snapped at me. I left her alone. There was no cry, not from me." His words came too fast, tripping over each other. Holmes stood, pacing the room, his boots clicking on the floor. Yet a cry was heard, and a man was seen near the costume room, wearing a red scarf. A scarf like the one tied to the cyanide vial. Curious, isn't it? He stopped, his eyes boring into Lyle's. What did Eleanor know that made her a threat? Lyle stood, his fists clenched. "I'm no killer. I cared for Eleanor, her music, her talent. You're chasing shadows, Holmes." He stormed out. The door slamming behind him, Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight. "Watson, Lyle's hiding something. His anger is a mask, but it's slipping. We need to see his office, his papers, anything that ties him to the cyanide or the scarf." He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin case. To the concert hall. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray and shadow. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. Inside, the stage was silent, the air heavy with dust and the echo of Eleanor's final note. We headed to Lyle's office, a cramped room stuffed with sheet music, batons, and a desk piled with papers. Holmes rifled through them, his hands swift, but careful. He paused at a letter half buried under a stack, its seal broken. It was addressed to Lyle, written in a neat, flowing hand. Meet me after the recital. We must settle this. E.V. I stared, my breath catching. Eleanor wrote, "This, another meeting, like the note in her dressing room." Holmes nodded, slipping the letter into his pocket. She was planning something, Watson. A confrontation, perhaps. Lyle's motive is clearer now. Jealousy, control, or something deeper. He searched the desk, finding a small ledger. It listed payments not for music but for supplies, dated days before Eleanor's death. One entry caught his eye. Chemist, Fleet St. 4th Instay. The same day Hartley sold the cyanide. We left the office, moving to the stage. Holmes knelt by the music stand where Eleanor had fallen. The vial, the handkerchief, the scarf, now this letter, they're all tied to Lyle, he said. But the code on the music sheet, it's still the key. He pulled it out, the numbers glowing in the dim light. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table: the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter, the music sheet. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a warning. Watson, Lyle is our focus now, his lies, his presence, his motive. They point to guilt, but the code, the compartment, they suggest a larger game. He tapped the music sheet. These numbers aren't random. They're a message, and Eleanor died to keep it silent. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Could Lyle have planted the handkerchief to frame me, or to hide the real poison? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Both are possible. The maestro controls the stage, but someone else may be pulling his strings. Tomorrow we confront Lyle again, and we break this code. He picked up the violin, plucking a string, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's music is still speaking, Watson. We just need to listen. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and Lyle's secrets were a blade. As Holmes studied the code, I felt the case tightening, its shadows closing in, the truth just out of reach. Chapter 9. Footprints in the fog. The fog over Baker Street was a thick, gray veil, swallowing the gas lamps and muting the clatter of early morning carts. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals and the faint must of old books. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen scratching notes on Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cyanide-stained handkerchief in my bag, the red silk scrap, the second vial, and now the letter to Lyle, signed with Eleanor's initials. Each clue was a stone in a river, but the current of truth kept slipping through my fingers. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, the music sheet in his hand, his eyes fixed on the numbers, 3, 7, 12, like a hunter staring down prey. The violin lay on the table, its polished wood catching the firelight, silent but heavy with secrets. Watson, Holmes said, his voice sharp and low, a killer leaves tracks, even in fog. Lyle's lies are footprints, but they lead somewhere, or to someone. We need to follow them. He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. The letter to Lyle suggests a confrontation. We must find where it was meant to happen. A knock broke the quiet, soft but urgent. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Holmes, a boy's here. Says he's from the streets near the concert hall. Looks like he's got something to tell you. Her voice trembled, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Bring him in. A moment later, a scrawny lad slipped into the room, his cap pulled low, his clothes patched and damp from the fog. He was no older than 14, with sharp eyes and a nervous twitch in his hands. He held a small, dirty scrap of paper, folded. Tight, sirs, he said, his voice quick. I'm Jimmy, one of the irregulars. Found this near the hall in the alley by the stage door. Thought it might mean something. He handed the paper to Holmes, stepping back as if eager to bolt. Holmes unfolded it, his eyes scanning the scrawl. It was a torn note, written in a hurried hand. Alley, 10 p.m., don't be late, Evie. I leaned over, my heart racing. Another note matching the time on the scrap from Eleanor's dressing room. Meet me at 10. Trust no one. Holmes's lips twitched a faint smile. Well done, Jimmy. Where exactly did you find this? The boy shuffled his feet. In the muck, sir, near a crate by the stage door. Almost missed it, but it looked important, with them initials. He grinned, proud, and Holmes slipped him a shilling. Jimmy vanished into the fog, his footsteps fading fast. Holmes turned to me, holding the note to the light. Watson, this confirms it. Eleanor planned a meeting in the alley, likely after her private recital. Someone was there, or meant to be. He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin case. To the concert hall. The alley holds answers. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars dim and cold. The alley beside the stage door was narrow, damp, and littered with broken crates and rubbish. The fog clung to the walls, making the air feel heavy, like a secret waiting to be whispered. Holmes knelt by the crate Jimmy had mentioned, his eyes scanning the ground. Here, he said, pointing to a faint footprint in the mud, half-washed, by rain but clear enough. A man's boot, narrow, with a worn heel. Nearby was a scuff mark, as if someone had slipped in a hurry. Watson, note this, Holmes said, his voice low. The footprint is fresh, likely from the night of the murder. Our man in the red scarf, perhaps? He moved along the alley, his eyes darting from the ground to the walls. At the base of a brick wall, he paused, picking up a small bent cigarette, stub, its paper-stained but intact. Cheap tobacco, he murmured, sniffing it. Not a gentleman's brand. Curious. I followed, my boots sinking into the muck. Could it be a stagehand's? They're always out here, smoking between shifts. Holmes shook his head. Possibly, but this was dropped recently, before the rain. And look. He pointed to a faint scratch on the wall, at knee height, where a fleck of red paint clung to the brick. A case, perhaps, brushed against the wall or something else. He scraped the fleck into an envelope, his movements precise. We returned to the hall, entering through the stage door. The air inside was heavy with dust and the ghost of Eleanor's music. Holmes moved to the stage where her violin had fallen, then to the dressing room. He checked the door again, its lock unscarred. She met someone here, Watson, before the alley. The cry Clara heard, it was no accident. He knelt by the table where the teacup still sat, cold and untouched. He sniffed it again, frowning. Still no cyanide here. The poison came later on stage. We questioned the stagehands, focusing on the alley. Most claimed they saw nothing, too busy with the show. But Ben, the young hand who'd seen Lyle near my bag, hesitated when Holmes asked about the alley. I saw a man there night of the show, he said, his voice low. Tall, dark coat, scarf over his face. He was by the crates, looking nervous, then slipped away when the crowd started leaving. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A red scarf? Ben shrugged. Couldn't tell, sir, too dark. But he had a case, small, like for a flute or something. His face flushed, and he looked away. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the cigarette stub, the paint fleck. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling, like a question. Watson, the alley is our stage now. The footprint, the cigarette, the paint. They point to a man who was there, waiting for Eleanor. But was it Lyle, or another? I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. The note matches the one in her dressing room. She was meeting someone, maybe the killer. Holmes nodded, his eyes on the music sheet. And the code, 3712. It's tied to this meeting. Eleanor knew something dangerous, Watson. The Stradivarius, the cyanide, the alley, they're all part of her secret. He tapped the numbers. Tomorrow we track the man in the scarf. His footprints will lead us to the truth. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a shadow, and the alley's clues were a faint light. As Holmes studied the code, I felt the case tightening, its secrets stirring in the fog, waiting for us to follow. Chapter 10. The Locked Room Riddle. The fog over Baker Street was a dense gray curtain, swallowing the gas lamps and muting the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp sting of chemicals, and the musty scent of old books. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cyanide-stained handkerchief in my bag, the red silk scrap, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, and the alley note with its cryptic 10 p.m. Each clue was a brick, but the wall of truth remained unbuilt. Sherlock Holmes stood by his workbench, the music sheet spread before him, his eyes fixed on the numbers 3, 7, 12, like a mathematician facing an unsolvable equation. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood gleaming in the firelight, silent, but heavy with secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice sharp and low, "a locked room is a liar's paradise. Eleanor's dressing room, her cry, the absence of a killer's exit, they point to a puzzle designed to deceive." He tapped, the music sheet, his fingers restless. "The alley note confirms a meeting, but the room where Clara heard the cry holds the key. We need to unravel its riddle." A knock broke the silence, quick and nervous. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, a woman's here, says she's from the concert hall. She's trembling, won't say much." Her voice was tight, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show her in." A moment later, a small woman stepped into the room, her face lined with worry, her gray hair tucked under a plain bonnet. She clutched a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, her hands shaking. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Agnes Tate, cleaner at the Royal Concert Hall. I found something in Miss Vance's dressing room after you left yesterday. I didn't know what to do." She held out the parcel, her eyes wide with fear. Holmes took it, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a brass key, small and worn, with a faint engraving. RCH. Royal Concert Hall. I leaned closer, my heart quickening. "A key to her dressing room?" I asked. Holmes turned it over, his eyes narrowing. "Possibly, or to something else within the hall." He looked at Agnes. "Where exactly did you find this and when?" Agnes swallowed, her hands twisting. "Under the rug near the dressing room door. I was sweeping yesterday after everyone left. It was tucked in a corner like someone hid it in a hurry." Her voice trembled. "I heard about Miss Vance, the poison. I thought it might matter." Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "You've done well, Miss Tate. Did you see anyone near the dressing room that night, before or after her performance?" Agnes shook her head. "No, sir. I was cleaning the upper gallery far from the stage. But the room, it always felt wrong after she died, like someone had been there who shouldn't." She shivered, pulling her shawl tight, and Holmes dismissed, her gently slipping the key into his pocket. He turned to me, his eyes alight. "Watson, a locked room with a hidden key, this changes the game. Clara heard a cry, a man's voice, yet no one was seen leaving. This key suggests another way in or out." He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin case. "To the concert hall. The dressing room is our riddle, and we'll solve it." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a maze of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold and silent under the gaslights. Inside, the stage was untouched, the air heavy with the memory of Eleanor's fall. We headed straight to her dressing room, a small space with a mirror, a table, and a wardrobe full of gowns. Holmes knelt by the door, examining the lock. It was simple, unscarred, but the key fit perfectly, turning with a soft click. "Her own key," I said, frowning. "But why hide it under the rug?" Holmes didn't answer, his eyes scanning the room. He moved to the rug, pulling it back. The floor beneath was polished wood, but a faint scratch caught his eye, a thin line, barely visible near the wall. He pressed it, and a small panel clicked open, revealing a narrow crawlspace just wide enough for a person to slip through. Dust coated the edges, but fresh scuff marks showed recent use. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low. This is our answer. A secret passage hidden in plain sight. The cry, the man's voice. No one left because they didn't need to. He crawled inside, his lantern casting shadows on the walls. I followed, my heart pounding. The passage was tight, smelling of damp wood and earth, leading to a small hatch that opened into the costume room. Holmes emerged, brushing dust from his coat. The killer entered here, spoke to Eleanor, perhaps argued, then left the same way. Clara heard the cry but saw no one because they were already gone. He examined the costume room, finding another faint mark, a smudge of yellow powder, like the cyanide residue, near the crate where the second vial was found. We returned to the dressing room, where Holmes tested the key again, then checked the wardrobe, the mirror, the table. The teacup still sat, cold and untouched. He sniffed it, frowning. No poison here, but the vial on the stage. It was placed after she drank. He paused, his eyes on the hidden panel. The killer knew this passage, Watson. Someone with access, someone who knew the hall's secrets. We questioned the stagehands, focusing on the costume room and the passage. Most claimed ignorance, but Ben, the young hand, hesitated when asked about the crawlspace. I've heard stories, he said, his voice low. Old hands say the hall's got hidden ways, built years ago for quick exits. Never seen 'em myself, but maybe someone did. His eyes darted away and Holmes let him go, his mind already racing. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. Watson, the locked room is unlocked now. The passage, the key, the cyanide. They point to a killer who planned every step. But the music sheet, its code, it's still the heart of this. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. The passage explains the cry, but who used it? Lyle? Dutton? Someone else? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. All are possible, but Lyle's lies grow heavier. His letter, his presence, his access to the hall's secrets, they fit too well. Tomorrow, we press him harder, and we crack this code. He picked up the violin, plucking a string, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's death was a performance, Watson, and the killer is still on stage. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a riddle, and the hidden passage had opened a door. As Holmes studied the code, I felt the case tightening, its secrets closer, but still veiled in shadow. Chapter 11. Whispers of Betrayal. The fog over Baker Street clung like a damp shroud, dimming the gas lamps to faint glimmers and muffling the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharp bite of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books stacked in precarious piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cyanide-stained handkerchief in my bag, the red silk scrap, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, and now the brass key and secret passage. Each clue was a thread in a tangled web, but the spider remained hidden. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the music sheet in his hand, his eyes locked on the numbers, 3, 7, 12, like a chess master studying a critical move. The violin rested on the table, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent witness to the crime. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. Betrayal is the heart of this case. Eleanor trusted someone, perhaps Lyle, perhaps another, and it cost her life. The passage, the key, the code, they point to an intimate deception. He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. We need to know who she trusted and why they turned on her. A knock broke the silence, soft but urgent. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron into knots. Mr. Holmes, a young lady's here, says she knew Miss Vance. She's nervous, keeps looking over her shoulder. Her voice trembled, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show her in. A moment later, a woman stepped into the room, young with delicate features and dark hair tucked under a simple hat. Her eyes were red, her hands clutching a small embroidered purse. She stood hesitantly, as if unsure whether to stay or flee. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she said, her voice soft but steady. I'm Lillian Gray, a violinist in the orchestra. Eleanor was my friend. I heard you're investigating her death and I can't stay silent anymore. She swallowed, her fingers tightening on the purse. She told me something, the day before she died. Something dangerous. Holmes gestured to a chair, his tone calm but firm. Sit, Miss Gray. Tell us everything exactly as she said it. His eyes were like hawks, missing nothing as she sat, her hands trembling. Lillian took a shaky breath. Eleanor was scared. She said someone was watching her, following her after rehearsals. She didn't know who, but she thought it was about the Stradivarius. She said it wasn't just a violin, it held a secret, something worth more than gold. She wouldn't tell me what, but she was meeting someone that night after the recital to settle it. She said she didn't trust Mr. Lyle anymore. Her voice broke and she pressed a hand to her mouth. I scribbled notes, my heart racing. A secret in the violin, a meeting, distrust of Lyle. This matched the letter, the alley note, the cry. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Miss Gray, did she mention a name? A place? Anything specific about this meeting? Lillian shook her head, tears welling. Only that it was in the alley, at 10. She said she had to face them, or it would never stop. I begged her not to go, but she was stubborn. She said the music sheet would prove everything. Her eyes flicked to the sheet on the table and she gasped. That's hers, the one with the numbers. She showed it to me, said it was her insurance. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Insurance? Did she say what the numbers meant? No, Lillian said, her voice small. She just said they were a code, something only she understood. She kept it close, always in her case or on her stand. She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. I should have stopped her. I should have told someone. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. You've helped more than you know, Miss Gray. Did anyone else know about this secret? Dutton, Henley, anyone in the orchestra? Lillian hesitated. I don't think so. She was private, kept to herself. But Mr. Dutton, he was always watching. Her jealous of her solos, and Mr. Lyle, he was too close, always praising her, giving her gifts. She didn't like it, said it felt wrong. She stood, her purse clutched tight. Please find who did this. Holmes nodded, dismissing her gently. As her footsteps faded, he turned to me, his eyes alight. Watson, the net tightens. Eleanor's, fear, her meeting, the code, they point to a betrayal by someone close. Lyle is our focus, but the orchestra hides more shadows. He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin case. To the concert hall. We need Lyle's secrets, and the alley's truth. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray and shadow. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. Inside, the stage was silent, the air heavy with the ghost of Eleanor's music. We headed to Lyle's office, finding him hunched over a desk piled with sheet music. His face was drawn, his eyes wary as we entered. Mr. Holmes, he said, his voice tight. I've told you all I know. Why are you here again? His hands fidgeted, a baton rolling under his fingers. Holmes leaned against the desk, his voice smooth but sharp. You lied, Mr. Lyle. Eleanor planned to meet you in the alley after her recital. A letter, a note, her own words, they all point to you. What was she settling and why did it scare her? His eyes bored into Lyle's, unyielding. Lyle's face paled, his hands trembling. I didn't meet her. Yes, she sent me a letter. Asked to talk, but I never went. I was in my office after the show sorting music. Ask anyone. His voice rose, but his eyes darted away, betraying him. Holmes pulled out the alley note. This was found by the stage door. Her initials. Her handwriting. You were there, or you know who was. Lyle stared, his mouth opening, then closing. No words coming. We left him, shaken, and moved to the alley. The fog was thicker now, the air damp and cold. Holmes knelt by the crate where Jimmy found the note, his eyes scanning the mud. The footprint is still here, he said, pointing to the narrow boot mark. Nearby he found another clue, a small torn piece of paper half buried in the muck. It bore a single word, betrayer. The ink matched Eleanor's notes. I shivered, not from the cold. She wrote this, Holmes. She knew someone was against her. Holmes nodded, slipping the paper into his pocket. She was ready to confront them, and it cost her life. The passage, the key, the code, they're all part of her fight. He stood, his eyes scanning the alley's shadows. The killer used the passage, slipped out here, and left this note, perhaps by mistake. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table, the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter, the alley note, the key, the torn paper. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a warning. Watson, Eleanor's betrayal was planned. Lyle's lies, the orchestra's envy, the hidden passage, they point to a conspiracy, but the code, it's her voice speaking from the grave. Chapter 12. The violin's last note. The fog over Baker Street hung like a thick gray curtain, dimming the gas lamps to faint glimmers and muffling the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharp sting of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books piled in corners. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet with numbers 3, 7, 12, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, and the torn paper marked betrayer. Each clue was a note in a dark melody, but the composer's face remained hidden. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the music sheet in his hand, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a hunter sizing up a elusive quarry. The violin lay on the table, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent witness to a deadly secret. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. A violin's note can linger long after it's played. Eleanor's Stradivarius holds more than music. It holds her killer's motive. He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. The code, the compartment, the cry, they're all tied to this instrument. We need to know what it hid. A knock broke the silence, quick and nervous. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron into knots. Mr. Holmes, a man's here, says he knew Miss Vance. He's shaken, keeps clutching a letter. Her voice trembled, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show him in. A moment later, a man stepped into the room, middle-aged, with a thin frame and a face etched with worry. His coat was worn but clean, his hands clutching a crumpled envelope. His eyes darted around, as if expecting danger in our cluttered parlor. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he said, his voice low and unsteady. I'm Arthur Crane, a friend of Eleanor's. She gave me this letter the day before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should bring it to you. He handed the envelope to Holmes, his hands trembling. Holmes opened it carefully, revealing a single sheet of paper, folded tight. The handwriting was Eleanor's, hurried but clear. The violin hides the truth. If I fall, check the bridge. Trust no one in the orchestra. I leaned over, my heart racing. The bridge, the part of the violin that holds the strings. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. Mr. Crane, when did she give you this? And what did she say? Crane swallowed, his eyes fixed on the violin. The afternoon before her last show. She was scared, said someone was after her Stradivarius, not for its value, but for what it held. She mentioned a secret, something that could ruin someone important. She wouldn't say who, only that she was meeting them after her recital to settle it. His voice broke and he rubbed his face. I thought she was exaggerating. I was wrong. Holmes held up the letter, his eyes gleaming. Did she mention the music sheet or the numbers written on it? Crane shook his head. No, but she kept her music close, always checking it. She said it was her proof, whatever that meant. He glanced at the music sheet on the table, his eyes widening. That's hers, the one with the strange marks. Holmes nodded, dismissing him gently. You've helped more than you know. Mr. Crane, stay in London. Crane nodded, his shoulders slumped, and left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Holmes turned to me, the letter in hand. Watson, the violin's bridge is our next clue. Eleanor hid something there, or near it, something worth killing for. He grabbed the Stradivarius, his fingers moving to the bridge, a small wooden piece under the strings. He examined it under his magnifying glass, his breath steady but focused. Here, he said, pointing to a faint seam, barely visible along the bridge's edge. With a small tool, he pried it open, revealing a tiny hollow space, just big enough for a folded paper. It was empty, but a faint scratch inside suggested something had been removed. I stared, my breath catching. The papers Langley mentioned, could this be where she hid them? Holmes nodded, his eyes alight. Almost certainly. The killer took them but left the violin not knowing its full secret. He set the instrument down, pulling out the music sheet. The numbers, 3, 7, 12. They're a cipher for what was hidden here. We need to search her dressing room again, and the stage where she fell. He grabbed his coat, the music sheet, and the violin case. To the concert hall. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. The stage was silent, the air heavy with the memory of Eleanor's final note. Holmes knelt by the spot where the violin had landed, his eyes scanning the floor. The bridge was tampered with, he said, pointing to a faint scuff mark, as if the violin had been dropped deliberately. Someone handled it after she fell, Watson. Someone who knew what to look for. We moved to the dressing room, the small space still untouched, the teacup cold on the table. Holmes examined the wardrobe, the mirror, the floor, then paused. At the music stand where a single sheet had been overlooked, a fragment torn with a single number, 6. It matched Eleanor's handwriting, the ink fresh. Another piece of the cipher, Holmes said, slipping it into his pocket. She was scattering clues, knowing she was in danger. We questioned the stagehands, focusing on the violin. Most claimed they hadn't touched it, but Molly, the young seamstress, hesitated. I saw someone by the stage after Miss Vance fell, she said, her voice small. A man tall with a scarf. He was near the violin, like he was checking it, then left through the stage door. Her hands twisted, and Holmes nodded, letting her go. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the list of initials, the new music fragment. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. Watson, the violin's last note was a warning. The bridge, the code, the papers. They point to a secret Eleanor died to protect. The man in the scarf is our key. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle? He was close to her, had access to the stage. Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Lyle's a suspect, but the orchestra hides more shadows. Dutton's jealousy, Henley's envy, or someone else entirely. Tomorrow, we decode these numbers and find the missing papers. He plucked a string on the violin, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's music is still playing, Watson. We just need to hear its truth. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the violin's secret was a blade. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its shadows closer but still veiled in fog. Chapter 13. A trail of sheet music. The fog over Baker Street was a dense gray curtain, dimming the gas lamps to faint glows and muting the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharper sting of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books piled in corners. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden compartment, the coded music sheet, the cyanide-stained handkerchief, the red silk scrap, the second, vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, and the torn paper marked betrayer. Each clue was a note in a haunting melody, but the composer remained hidden. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheet in his hand, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers, 3, 7, 12, like a codebreaker facing a stubborn cipher. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent keeper of secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. "Sheet music is a language, and this one speaks of betrayal. The numbers are a cipher, but they need context. Other pages, perhaps, that Eleanor left behind." He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. Her private recital, the alley meeting, they're tied to this code. We need to find her other scores. A knock broke the silence, quick and nervous. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, a young man's here, says he's from the music shop near the concert hall. He's got something for you, but he's jumpy." Her voice trembled, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show him in." A moment later, a lanky young man stepped into the room, his coat damp from the fog, his hands clutching a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He was barely 20, with nervous eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice quick. "I'm Peter Walsh, clerk at Harper's Music Shop. Miss Vance was a regular, always buying sheet music. After I read about her death, I found this in our back room tucked away." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a stack of music sheets, yellowed and worn, with notes scrawled in the margins. These were hers. "She left them last week, said she'd pick them up after her show. I thought you should see them." Holmes took the sheets, his eyes scanning the pages. Some were standard scores, Bach, Mozart, but others were handwritten, like the one from the stage with similar numbers in the margins, 4, 9, 15. His lips twitched, a faint smile. "Miss Vance was building a puzzle, Mr. Walsh. Did she say anything about these sheets, who they were for, or why she left them?" Peter shook his head. "She was quiet, rushed, said they were important, told me to keep them safe. I locked them in the back, but no one came for them after she died." His voice faltered, and he shifted, uneasy. "There was a man, though, came in yesterday, asking if she'd left anything. Tall, dark coat, red scarf over his face. I told him no, and he left quick." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A red scarf. Did he give a name or say anything else?" "No, sir," Peter said. "Just asked about her, then vanished. I didn't like his look. Too sneaky." He handed over the sheets and stepped back, eager to leave. Holmes slipped him a coin, and Peter hurried out, his footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes spread the new sheets on the table beside the original music sheet. "Watson, this is a breakthrough. More numbers, more clues." Eleanor was hiding something across her music, a secret too dangerous to speak. He traced the numbers, 4, 9, 15, comparing them to the 3, 7, 12. They're sequential, but not simple. A cipher, perhaps a substitution code tied to her violin or her recital. I leaned over, my heart racing. Could these point to the papers in the violin's compartment? A list, like Langley said? Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Exactly. The sheets are a trail leading to what she died for. We need to check her lodging, any other scores she kept." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, and the violin case. "To Eleanor's home, then the concert hall. The trail is fresh." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. Eleanor's lodging was a modest flat in Bloomsbury, a narrow building with creaking stairs. The landlady, Mrs. Carter, let us in, her face drawn. "Poor Miss Vance," she said, unlocking the door. "Such a quiet tenant, always playing her violin." The flat was small, tidy, with a bed, a desk, and a shelf of music books. A faint scent of rosin lingered like a ghost of her presence. Holmes searched the desk, finding more sheet music, some printed, some handwritten. One page caught his eye, tucked inside a book of Vivaldi. It bore numbers like the others: 2, 8, 14. "Another piece of the cipher," he said, slipping it into his pocket. Under the bed he found a small wooden box locked tight. The brass key from the concert hall fit perfectly, revealing a single sheet inside. No music, just a list of initials: CL, ED, CH, and a date, 3 days before her death. "Lyle, Dutton, Henley," I said, my breath catching. She was tracking them. Holmes's lips twitched. Or someone was tracking her. "This list is a clue, Watson, but not the answer." We left, the fog thicker now, and headed to the concert hall. The stage was silent, the air heavy with dust and memory. Holmes moved to the orchestra pit where Eleanor's stand had been. He knelt, finding a faint mark, a smudge of ink like from a pen dropped in a hurry. "The killer was here," he said, his voice low. "They left the vial, the handkerchief, and perhaps these sheets." He stood, scanning the pit. "The music is the key, Watson. The numbers are a code for something specific. A name, a place, a secret." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table: the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the new music sheets, the list. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. "Watson, the trail of sheet music is Eleanor's voice. The numbers, the list, the violin, they point to a secret she died to protect. The man in the red scarf, he's hunting these sheets." I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle's letter, the list. Could he be the man in the scarf? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Possible, but the net is wider. Dutton, Henley, or someone outside the orchestra. Tomorrow we decode these numbers and find the missing papers. He plucked a string on the violin, the note sharp and mournful. "Eleanor's music is leading us, Watson. We just need to follow." The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a shadow, and the trail of sheet music was a faint light. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its secrets closer but still hidden in the fog. Chapter 14. The Widow's Testimony. The fog over Baker Street clung like a damp gray shroud, dimming the gas lamps to faint flickers and muffling the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench and the musty scent of old books stacked in uneven piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheet with numbers 3, 7, 12, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, and the new music fragment with the number 6. Each clue was a piece of a shattered mosaic, but the picture of the killer remained blurred. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the music sheet in his hand, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a hunter staring down a shadowed trail. The violin lay on the table, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent keeper of deadly secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp, "a violin's secret is only as safe as its owner's trust. Eleanor hid something in that bridge and someone killed to claim it. The code, the compartment, the betrayal, they're all woven together." He set the music sheet down, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. "We need a witness who saw beyond the orchestra's curtain." A knock broke the silence, soft but heavy with urgency. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting, her apron into knots. Mr. Holmes, a woman's here says she's kin to Miss Vance. She's old, frail, and looks like she's carrying a heavy burden. Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show her in. A moment later, an elderly woman shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on a cane, her face lined with grief. Her black dress was faded but neat, her gray hair tucked under a widow's bonnet. She clutched a small, worn locket, her hands trembling as she stood. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I'm Mrs. Clara Vance, Eleanor's widowed aunt. I raised her after her parents passed. I read about her murder in the papers, and I can't stay silent." She sank into a chair, her locket pressed to her chest, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Holmes leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "Mrs. Vance, we're sorry for your loss. Tell us what you know. Did Eleanor share any fears, any secrets before her death?" His eyes locked onto hers, calm but piercing, missing nothing. Clara took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening on the locket. "Eleanor was my pride, her music a light in this dark world. But these last months she was afraid. She came to me 2 weeks ago, said someone was after her violin. Not for its value, but for what it hid. She spoke of papers, old ones, tied to a scandal in the orchestra. She wouldn't say what, only that they could ruin someone powerful." Her voice broke and she opened the locket, revealing a tiny portrait of a young Eleanor, violin in hand. "She said if she didn't come back from her recital, I should find you." I scribbled notes, my heart racing. Papers in the violins. Bridge. A scandal. A powerful enemy. It matched Arthur Crane's letter and the coded sheets. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Did she name this person? Lyle? Dutton? Henley? Or perhaps a man with a red scarf?" Clara's eyes widened, her hands shaking. "She didn't name them, but she mentioned Mr. Lyle, the conductor. Said he was too close, always pressing her to share her secrets, giving her gifts she didn't want. She distrusted him. And she saw a man outside the hall, tall, with a red scarf, following her after rehearsals. She thought he was sent by someone in the orchestra." She paused, reaching into her pocket. "She left this with me the day before she died." She handed Holmes a small sealed envelope, its wax stamped with Eleanor's initials. Holmes opened it carefully, revealing a single sheet of music, handwritten, with numbers in the margins. 5, 11, 17. It matched the others, the same hurried scrawl. "Another piece of her cipher," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Mrs. Vance, did she say where she kept these papers or what they contained?" Clara shook her head, tears falling. "Only that the violin was her safe, and the music was her key. She was meeting someone in the alley after her recital to end it. I begged her not to go, but she was determined, said the truth had to come out. She clutched the locket, her voice a whisper. I should have stopped her." Holmes took the sheet, studying it, then handed the locket back gently. "You've helped more than you know, Mrs. Vance. Stay in London, we may need you again." She nodded, her cane tapping as she left, her grief a heavy shadow in the room. Holmes turned to me, the new music sheet in hand. "Watson, the widow's testimony tightens the noose. Eleanor's violin hid papers that threatened someone powerful, Lyle perhaps, or another. The code is her map, and we're close to reading it." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, and the violin case. "To the concert hall. We need Lyle's secrets and the orchestra's records." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. Lyle's office was cluttered, sheet music and batons scattered across his desk. Holmes rifled through, papers, finding a small notebook tucked under a pile. It listed payments not for music but for special services, dated days before Eleanor's death. One entry stood out. "To R.S., 2nd insters for delivery." The date was close to the cyanide purchase. I pointed to it, my breath catching. "R.S. Red scarf. Could this be our man?" Holmes nodded, slipping the notebook into his pocket. "Possibly. Or a clever misdirection. Lyle's hiding something, Watson. We moved to the stage, where Eleanor's stand had been. Holmes knelt, finding another faint mark, a smudge of rosin near the spot where the violin fell. She was here, writing her code, knowing danger was near, he said, his voice low. We questioned the orchestra members, focusing on Lyle. Most were evasive, but Clara Henley, the flautist, hesitated when asked about him. He was obsessed. With Eleanor, she said, her voice sharp. Always giving her solos gifts. She didn't like it, said he wanted something from her. Her eyes darted away and Holmes let her go, his mind already racing. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music, fragments, the notebook. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a warning. Watson, the widow's words confirm it. Eleanor's violin held a secret that threatened someone powerful. The code, the papers, the betrayal, they're all linked. He tapped the numbers. These sheets are her voice speaking from the grave. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle's payments, the red scarf. Could he be behind it all? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Lyle's a suspect, but the net is wider. The orchestra hides shadows. Dutton's jealousy, Henley's envy, or someone else. Tomorrow we crack this code and find the papers. He plucked a string. On the violin, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's truth is close, Watson. We just need to listen. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the widow's testimony was a light. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its secrets stirring in the shadows, waiting for us to uncover them. Chapter 15. The Cipher's Key. The fog over Baker Street was a dense gray veil, wrapping the gas lamps in faint halos and muting the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp bite of chemicals from Holmes's workbench and the musty scent of old books stacked in teetering piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, and 5, 11, 17, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, and Lyle's notebook with its cryptic RS. Payment. Each clue was a note in a haunting symphony, but the conductor remained in shadow. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheets spread before him, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a mathematician facing a stubborn equation. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent guardian of deadly secrets. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. A cipher is a lock, and every lock has a key. Eleanor's numbers are a message, hidden in her music, pointing to the papers in her violin. We need to crack this code to find her killer. He tapped the sheets, his fingers restless. The widow's testimony, Lyle's payments, the red scarf, they're all threads, but the cipher is the needle. A knock broke the silence, quick and urgent. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Holmes, a man's here, says he's a scholar of music. He's got papers and looks nervous, like he's being watched. Her voice trembled, and I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show him in. A moment later, a wiry man stepped into the room, his spectacles perched low on his nose, his coat dusted with chalk. He carried a leather portfolio, clutching it tightly, his eyes darting around our cluttered parlor. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he said, his voice quick and low. I'm Professor Henry Walsh, musicologist at King's College. I knew Eleanor Vance. She consulted me about her work. After her death, I found something in my archives that might help. He opened the portfolio, pulling out a thin, yellowed booklet, its pages filled with musical notation and cryptic symbols. This is a treatise on musical ciphers, One Eleanor studied. I think it's tied to her music sheets. Holmes took the booklet, his eyes scanning the pages. The symbols were strange. Numbers, letters, and musical notes intertwined, with instructions for encoding messages and scores. His lips twitched, a faint smile. Professor Walsh, did Eleanor discuss her cipher, or mention a secret in her violin? Walsh adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling. She visited me a month ago, asking about ciphers from the 18th century, ways composers hid messages in music. She was excited but scared, said she'd found something in her Stradivarius, papers she called them, tied to a scandal. She was working on a code to protect them using her music sheets. He pointed to the sheets on the table. Those numbers, they're like the ones in this treatise. She said they'd lead to the truth. I scribbled notes, my heart racing. A musical cipher, papers in the violin, a scandal. It matched Clara Vance's story and Arthur Crane's letter. Holmes leaned forward, his tone firm. Did she name anyone? Lyle, Dutton, Henley, or a man with a red scarf? Walsh shook his head. No names, but she mentioned the orchestra, said someone there was after her secret. She saw a man following her, tall, with a scarf. Red, I think. She thought he was hired by someone close. He hesitated, then added, she left a note. With me, said to give it to you if she didn't return. He pulled a small folded paper from his portfolio and handed it to Holmes. Holmes unfolded it, revealing Eleanor's handwriting. The cipher is in the notes. 3rd string, 7th fret, 12th bar. Look to the hall's archives. I leaned over, my breath catching. The numbers, 3, 7, 12, matched the music sheet. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Professor, did she say where in the archives or what the papers contained? No, Walsh said, his voice low. She was cryptic, said it was safer that way. But she was meeting someone after her recital in the alley to settle it. I begged her to be careful. His hands shook, and he clutched the portfolio. I should have done more. Holmes dismissed him gently. You've helped greatly, Professor. Stay in London. Walsh nodded, hurrying out, his footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes turned to me, the note in hand. Watson, the ciphers, key is within reach. The 3rd string, 7th fret, 12th bar. It's a guide to decode the numbers. We need the hall's archives. He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the violin case, and the treatise. To the concert hall. The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. The archives were in the basement, a dusty room filled with shelves of old programs, scores, and ledgers. Holmes moved swiftly, searching for anything tied to Eleanor or the orchestra. He found a folder marked Private Recitals, its pages yellowed but intact. One entry stood out, a recital scheduled for Eleanor. The night she died, booked by R.S.? The same initials as Lyle's payment. I pointed to it, my heart racing. R.S., the man in the red scarf. Holmes nodded, slipping the folder into his pocket. Or someone using the initials to hide. This recital was a trap, Watson. He searched further, finding a small locked box tucked behind a shelf. The brass key from the dressing room fit perfectly, revealing a single sheet inside. No music, just a list of dates and payments, all to R.S., spanning months, with notes about deliveries to the hall. We moved to the stage where Holmes examined the violin again, focusing on the 3rd string. He plucked it, his fingers pressing the 7th fret, counting bars in his mind. The 12th bar, he murmured, then turned to the music sheet. The numbers align with notes, G, D, A, a sequence, perhaps a word. He scribbled, testing the cipher against the treatise, his eyes alight. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table, the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. Watson, the cipher is cracking. The notes spell a name or a place tied to the papers in the violin. R.S. is our man, or our mask. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle's payments, the recital. Could he be RS? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Possible, but the orchestra hides more shadows. Dutton, Henley, or someone outside. Tomorrow we decode the full cipher and find RS. He plucked the violins. Third string, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's secret is singing, Watson. We're close to its final note. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the cipher's key was a light. As Holmes studied the code, I felt the case tightening, its secret stirring in the shadows, ready to be unveiled. Chapter 16. The Shadow in the Archives. The fog over Baker Street was a thick, gray shroud, dimming the gas lamps to faint glimmers and muffling the early morning clatter of London streets. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books stacked in precarious piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, and 5, 11, 17, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, Lyle's notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, and the payment list to RS. Each clue was a thread in a tangled web, but the spider remained unseen. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheets and Professor Walsh's treatise spread before him, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a chess master facing a critical move. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent keeper of a deadly secret. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. A cipher reveals its truth only when the light is right. Eleanor's numbers, G, D, A, are a name, a place, or a secret tied to the papers in her violin. The archives hold the final piece. He tapped the treatise, his fingers restless. The RS payments, the red scarf, the recital, they point to a shadow moving through the orchestra. A knock broke the silence, quick and heavy. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Holmes, a man's here says he's a caretaker at the concert hall. He's frightened, keeps muttering about the basement. Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show him in. A moment later, a stooped man shuffled into the room, his face weathered, his hands calloused from years of work. He wore a patched coat, his eyes wide with fear, clutching a small dusty ledger. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he said, his voice rough and low. I'm Tom Granger, caretaker at the Royal Concert Hall. I found this in the archives hidden behind a loose brick. After Miss Vance's death, I couldn't keep it to myself. He set the ledger on the table, his hands shaking. It's got names, dates, things that don't sit right. Holmes opened the ledger, his eyes scanning the pages. It was old, its ink faded but legible, listing payments and meetings, many marked with RS, and tied to the orchestra. One entry stood out. RS to meet EV Alley 10 p.m., 7th Insti. The night Eleanor died. Another noted a delivery of chemical supplies to the hall, dated the day before the cyanide purchase. Holmes's lips twitched a faint smile. Mr. Granger, where exactly was this hidden, and did anyone else know? Granger swallowed, his eyes darting to the door. In the basement, sir, behind a brick in the archive wall. I was fixing a leak, saw it loose, and found this. No one else goes there but me, not since the old manager left. But I saw someone, snooping, night of the show, tall dark coat, scarf over his face. He was in the basement near the archives, then slipped out quick when I came by. His voice trembled and he clutched his coat. Holmes leaned forward, his tone firm. A red scarf? Granger nodded. Red, I think. Hard to see in the dark, but it stood out. He had a case, small, like for papers or a weapon. His hands shook, and he stepped back as if afraid of his own words. Holmes dismissed him gently. "You've done well, Mr. Granger. Stay silent and stay in London." Granger nodded, hurrying out, his footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes turned to me, the ledger in hand. "Watson, the archives are the killer's lair. This ledger ties R.S. to Eleanor's meeting and the cyanide. The man in the red scarf is no phantom, he's our key." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the treatise, the violin case, and the ledger. "To the concert hall. The basement holds the truth." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars cold under the gaslights. The basement was damp and dim, its air heavy with dust and mold. The archives were a maze of shelves packed with old scores, programs, and ledgers. Holmes moved to the wall Granger described, finding the loose brick. He pried it free, revealing a small hollow space, empty but for a faint trace of yellow powder. Cyanide, residue, like the vial in the costume room. "Sloppy," Holmes said, scraping the powder into an envelope. "The killer hid something here, perhaps the papers from the violin." He searched the shelves, finding a dusty folder marked Orchestra Correspondence. Inside was a letter, unsigned, in a neat hand. "EV must be silenced. The papers threaten all. R.S. will handle it." The date matched the week of Eleanor's death. I stared, my breath catching. R.S. was hired to kill her, Holmes. But by whom? Holmes nodded, slipping the letter into his pocket. "A conspiracy, Watson. Lyle's payments, the orchestra's envy, they're all part of it." He moved to a corner where a faint footprint marked the dust. A narrow boot, like the one in the alley. Nearby was a torn scrap of paper, bearing a single number. 18, in Eleanor's handwriting. "Another piece of the cipher," he said, his eyes gleaming. We questioned the stagehands, focusing on the basement. Most claimed ignorance, but Ben, the young hand, hesitated when asked about the archives. "I saw a man down there night of the show," he said, his voice low. Tall, scarf over his face, he was near the shelves, then left through the back stair. I thought he was a worker, but now... His face paled and Holmes let him go. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper. The music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the new letter, the cipher scrap. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a warning. "Watson, the archives reveal a plot. R.S. is the killer's hand, but someone else is the mind. The cipher GDA now 18 points to a name or a place." I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle's payments to R.S. Could he be the mastermind? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. "Possible, but the orchestra hides more shadows. Dutton, Henley, or a patron behind them. Tomorrow we decode the full cipher and hunt R.S. He plucked the violin's third string, the note sharp and mournful. "Eleanor's secret is close, Watson. The archives have spoken." The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper, beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the shadow in the archives was a light. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its secrets stirring in the fog, ready to be unveiled. Chapter 17. The Red Scarf's Trail. The fog over Baker Street was a heavy gray curtain, dimming the gas lamps to faint glows and muffling the early morning clatter of London streets. Inside 221B, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp sting of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books piled in uneven stacks. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and now 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked Betrayer, Lyle's, notebook with its R.S. payment, the recital folder, the payment list to R.S., and the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing. Each clue was a step on a dark path, but the figure at its end remained cloaked. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheets and Professor Walsh's treatise spread before him, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a hunter tracking a fleeting shadow. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent witness to a deadly plot. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. "A scarf hides a face, but not a purpose. The man in the red scarf, R.S., is our killer's hand, but the mind behind him is in the orchestra. The cipher, the papers, the archives, they're leading us to the truth." He tapped the treatise, his fingers restless. "The notes G, D.A. and the number 18 are a name or a place. We need to follow the scarf's trail." A knock broke the silence, quick and nervous. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, a woman's here, says she's a seamstress from near the concert hall. She's trembling, clutching a bit of cloth." Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show her in." A moment later, a small woman stepped into the room, her face worn, her hands clutching a scrap of red silk, identical to the one from the costume room. Her dress was plain, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice barely above. A whisper. "I'm Sarah Finch, seamstress on Drury Lane. I made this scarf for a man last week. After I heard about Miss Vance's murder, I thought you should know." She held out the silk, her hand shaking. He was strange, paid extra to keep it quiet. Holmes took the scrap, his eyes narrowing as he compared it to the one from the costume room. They matched, same weave, same dye. His lips twitched, a faint smile. Miss Finch described this man. Every detail, his face, his voice, his manner. Sarah swallowed, her hands twisting. Tall, thin, with a sharp face, but he kept his hat low and a coat collar up. His voice was low, rough, like he was hiding it. He wore gloves, black leather, and carried a small case like for papers. "He came to my shop the day before Miss Vance died, said he needed the scarf quick, no questions." Her voice trembled, and she glanced at the door. "I saw him again, 2 days ago, near the concert hall, watching the stage door." Holmes leaned forward, his tone firm. "Did he give a name or mention initials, R.S. perhaps?" Sarah shook her head. "No name, but he dropped a note when he paid. I kept it." She pulled a crumpled slip from her pocket, handing it to Holmes. It read, "R.S. to Hall, 7th, 10 p.m. The handwriting was sharp, unfamiliar, but the date matched Eleanor's death. I scribbled notes, my heart racing. R.S., the red scarf, the alley meeting, it was all converging. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Miss Finch, did anyone else know about this man, or see him at your shop?" "No, sir," she said, her voice small. "I work alone, and he came at dusk when the street was quiet, but I heard him mutter something about the violin and settling it. I thought he was just odd, but now—" Her voice broke, and she clutched her hands. Holmes dismissed her gently. "You've helped greatly, Miss Finch. Stay silent, and stay in London." She nodded, hurrying out, her footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes turned to me, the note in hand. "Watson, the red scarf's trail is hot. R.S. is no ghost. He's a hired man, tied to the violin and the alley. The cipher, the payments, the letter. They point to a plot within the hall." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the treatise, the violin case, the ledger, and the new note. "To Drury Lane, then the concert hall. We need to trace this man." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. Drury Lane was a narrow street, lined with shops and taverns. Sarah's shop was small, its windows dim with fog. Holmes examined the doorway, finding a faint scuff mark. Narrow boot, like the one in the alley and archives. Inside, he searched the counter where Sarah had served the man. A small ink stain marked the wood, matching the note's ink. "He wrote this here," Holmes said, his voice low. "Careless." We moved to the concert hall, its grand pillars, looming in the fog. The stage door was quiet. the air heavy with the memory of Eleanor's death. Holmes led us to the alley where the note placed RS at 10 p.m. He knelt by the crate, finding another clue, a small bent pin like one used to secure a scarf, caught in the mud. RS was here, he said, slipping it into an envelope. He waited for Eleanor, then acted. We searched the stage, focusing on the orchestra pit. Holmes found a faint trace of red dust, silk dye, near Eleanor's stand, where the violin had fallen. The scarf was here, Watson, after her death. RS checked the violin, perhaps took the papers. He moved to the basement archives, where the ledger was found. The loose brick was untouched, but a faint scratch on the wall caught his eye, a good mark, like from a metal case dragged across it. We questioned the stagehands, focusing on the alley and basement. Most claimed ignorance, but Molly, the young seamstress, hesitated when asked about the man in the scarf. "I saw him again," she said, her voice small. "Night after the murder, near the stage door. He was holding a case, looking angry, then left when he saw me." Her hands twisted and Holmes nodded, letting her go. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the new note, the pin. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. "Watson, the red scarf's trail leads to RS, a hired hand for a darker mind. The cipher, GDA18, points to the papers he stole." I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. "Lyle's payments to RS. Is he the mastermind, Holmes?" Exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. "Lyle's a suspect, but the orchestra hides more shadows. Dutton Henley or a patron. Tomorrow we track RS and decode the cipher's final note." He plucked the violin's third string, the note sharp and mournful. "Eleanor's truth is near, Watson. The scarf will lead us to it." The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the red scarf's trail was a light. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its secrets stirring in the fog, ready to be unveiled. Chapter 18. The orchestra's secret. The fog over Baker Street was a dense gray cloak, dimming the gas lamps to faint flickers and muting the early morning clatter of London's streets. Inside 221B, the air was thick with pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty scent of old books piled in cluttered stacks. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, Lyle's notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, and the scarf pin found in the mud. Each clue was a note in a dark symphony, but the conductor's identity remained veiled. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheets, Professor Walsh's treatise, and the new note spread before him. His sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a hunter tracking a cunning prey. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent witness to a deadly conspiracy. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp, "an orchestra plays as one, but its secrets are solo. The man in the red scarf RS is a hired hand, but the orchestra hides the mastermind. The cipher, the papers, the payments, they point to a scandal Eleanor died to expose." He tapped the treatise, his fingers restless. "The notes, G, D, A, and 18 are a name or a place. We need to uncover the orchestra's heart." A knock broke the silence, quick and heavy with urgency. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. "Mr. Holmes, a man's here, says he's an old musician from the orchestra. He's nervous, keeps looking behind him." Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Show him in." A moment later, an elderly man shuffled into the room, his face lined with age, his hands gnarled from years of playing. He wore a faded coat, his eyes sharp but wary, clutching a small worn journal. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I'm Samuel Reed, retired cellist from the Royal Concert Hall. I played there when Eleanor Vance was a rising star. After her murder, I couldn't stay quiet. This journal, it's mine from 10 years ago. It's got something you need to see." He set the journal on the table, his hands trembling slightly. Holmes opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. The journal was filled with notes on rehearsals, performances, and orchestra gossip, but one entry stood out, dated a decade earlier. CL and ED in heated row after show, talk of funds missing, papers hidden. EV overheard, looked scared. Another entry mentioned RS, new stagehand, too nosy, always near the dressing rooms. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Mr. Reed, what do these entries mean? Who was RS and what papers?" Reed sank into a chair, his eyes distant. 10 years ago, the orchestra was a mess. Money vanished, ticket sales, donations. Some said Charles Lyle, the conductor, was skimming. Others pointed to Edward Dutton, the first violinist. They argued, thought no one heard. Eleanor was young, just joined, but she was sharp, always listening. I saw her writing, maybe notes about what she heard. The papers, I never saw them, but rumors said they were proof of the theft, hidden somewhere in the hall. His voice lowered. RS was a stagehand, tall, quiet, always wearing a red scarf. He left sudden after a show and no one saw him again. I scribbled notes, my heart racing. A scandal, missing funds, papers, Eleanor's secret in the violin. Holmes leaned forward, his tone firm. "Did Eleanor ever speak of this? Or mention RS returning?" Reed shook his head. "Not to me, but she was private, kept her own counsel. After I retired, I heard she'd grown close to Lyle, then pulled away like she didn't trust him. If RS came back, he'd know the hall, its passages, its secrets." He paused, his hands tightening on the journal. "I saw a man like him week before she died near the stage door. Same build, same scarf. I thought my eyes were playing tricks." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Did you tell anyone about this journal or see anyone near the archives recently?" "No, sir," Reed said, his voice low. "Kept it locked away till I read about her death. The archives, I never went there, but they're a maze, easy to hide in." He stood, his hands shaking. "Find who did this, Mr. Holmes. For Eleanor." Holmes dismissed him gently. "You've helped greatly, Mr. Reed. Stay in London." Reed nodded, shuffling out, his footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes turned to me, the journal in hand. "Watson, the orchestra's secret is a theft, and Eleanor's papers were the proof. RS is no mere stagehand. He's a shadow from the past, hired to silence her. The cipher points to this scandal." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the treatise, the violin case, the ledger, the new note, and the journal. "To the concert hall. The archives and orchestra pit hold more answers." The cab rattled through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Royal Concert Hall loomed, ahead its pillars cold under the gaslights. The archives were dim, the air heavy with dust and secrets. Holmes moved to the shelf where the payment list was found, searching for more on the scandal. He uncovered a dusty ledger, its pages brittle, listing special funds diverted from the orchestra, signed by CL, Charles Lyle. One entry noted, "A payment to RS for disposal, dated 10 years ago, around the time Reed's journal mentioned the row." I pointed to it, my breath catching. Lyle stole funds, and RS cleaned up the mess. Could Eleanor have found this? Holmes nodded, slipping the ledger into his pocket. "She did, Watson. The papers in her violin, proof of Lyle's theft, perhaps others. She died to keep them hidden." We moved to the orchestra pit, where Eleanor's stand had been. Holmes knelt, finding a faint scratch on the floor, like from a metal case. RS was here after her fall, checking the violin. We questioned the orchestra members, focusing on Lyle and Dutton. Most were evasive, but Clara Henley, the flautist, hesitated when asked about the past. There were rumors years ago, she said, her voice low. Money missing, fights in the dressing rooms. Eleanor was new then, always watching. Lyle favored her, but she started avoiding him, like she knew something. Her eyes darted away, and Holmes let her go. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table: the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the new note, the pin, the journal, the old ledger. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. Watson, the orchestra's secret is theft, and Eleanor's cipher, GDA 18, names the thief. RS is the blade, but Lyle or another is the hand. I leaned over the table, my mind spinning. Lyle's ledgers, his payments, is he the killer? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the numbers. Lyle's guilty, but the net is wider. Dutton, Henley, or a patron. Tomorrow we decode the cipher and find RS. He plucked the violin's third string, the note sharp and mournful. Eleanor's truth is near, Watson. The orchestra will sing. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, and the orchestra's secret was a light. As Holmes studied the cipher, I felt the case tightening, its shadows stirring, ready to be unveiled. Chapter 19. The final note. The fog over Baker Street was a thick gray veil, dimming the gas lamps to faint glimmers and muffling the early morning clatter of London streets. Inside 221B, the air was heavy with pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench and the musty scent of old books stacked in teetering piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen tracing the edges of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, Lyle's notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, the scarf pin, Samuel Reed's journal, and the old ledger exposing Lyle's theft. Each clue was a note in a dark melody, and the final chord was near. Sherlock Holmes stood by the table, the music sheets, Professor Walsh's treatise, and Reed's journal spread before him, his sharp eyes locked on the numbers like a conductor facing the last bar of a symphony. The violin lay nearby, its polished wood catching the firelight, a silent witness to a deadly truth. Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. A final note resolves the song. Eleanor's cipher, GDA 18, names her killer, and the orchestra's scandal is the motive. RS is the blade, but Lyle, Dutton, or another is the hand. He tapped the treatise, his fingers steady but urgent. We've followed the scarf's trail, the archive's secrets, and now we must play the cipher's truth. A knock broke the silence, quick and desperate. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Holmes, a boy's here, one of your irregulars. He's breathless, says he's seen the man you're after. Her voice trembled, and I felt a prickle of unease. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Bring him in. A moment later, Jimmy, the scrawny lad from the streets, burst into the room, his cap askew, his eyes wide with excitement. His clothes were damp with fog, his hands clutching a small torn cloth, red silk like the scarf. Mr. Holmes, sir, Jimmy panted. I saw him, the man with the red scarf. He was skulking near the concert hall, by the river, not an hour ago. Dropped this when he saw me watchin'. He held out the cloth, his grin proud but nervous. Holmes took the silk, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. It matched the scraps from the costume room in Sarah Finch's shop. Same weave, same dye. Tucked in its folds was a small, crumpled note, its ink smudged but legible. RS to CL, paper secured, meet at dock, midnight. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. Well done, Jimmy. Where exactly by the river, and what did he look like? Jimmy straightened, eager. By the old warehouse, sir, near the Thames where the boats tie up. Tall, thin, dark coat, scarf over his face, red like this. He was carrying a case, small, like for papers, and he moved quick when he saw me. Looked angry, sir. His eyes darted to the door as if expecting pursuit. Holmes slipped him a shilling. Stay sharp, Jimmy, and stay clear of him. Jimmy nodded, vanishing into the fog, his footsteps quick and light. Holmes turned to me, the note in hand. Watson, the final note is struck. RS has the papers from Eleanor's violin, and he's meeting Lyle, or someone using his initials tonight. The cipher, the scarf, the scandal, they converge at the dock. He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the treatise, the violin case, the ledger, the journal, and the new note. To the Thames. We'll catch RS in the act. The cab rattled. Through the fog, the city a blur of gray shadows. The Thames was a dark ribbon, its banks slick with mist. The old warehouse looming like a ghost in the gloom. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of river mud and rotting wood. Holmes led us to the dock, his steps silent, his eyes scanning the shadows. Near a pile of crates he paused, pointing to a fresh footprint in the mud, a narrow boot, like those in the alley and archives. Beside it was a faint trace of red dust, silk dye. RS was here, Holmes whispered, his voice low. He moved behind a crate, pulling me into the shadows. We waited, the fog curling around us, the river lapping. Softly, minutes passed, then a figure emerged from the mist. Tall, thin, a dark coat flapping, a red scarf over his face. He carried a small metal case, his movements quick but cautious. He stopped by the dock, glancing around, his hand on the scarf. Holmes stepped out, his voice sharp. RS, your game is up. Hand over the case. The man froze, his eyes glinting in the dim light. He lunged for the river, but Holmes was faster, grabbing his arm. The scarf slipped, revealing a sharp face, pale, and lined with cold, calculating eyes. The case fell clattering on the dock. I rushed forward, my revolver drawn. Don't move, the man snarled, struggling, but Holmes pinned him, twisting his arm. Who hired you? Holmes demanded. Lyle? Dutton? Speak, the man spat, his voice rough. You'll get nothing from me, Holmes. The papers are mine. And you're too late. His eyes darted to the case, and I grabbed it, prying it open. Inside were folded papers, ledgers, letters, lists of payments, all marked. With CL and detailing stolen funds from the orchestra, dated 10 years ago and signed by Charles Lyle. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Eleanor's proof. You killed her for this, RS. The man laughed, a cold, bitter sound, but said no more. Holmes bound his hands with a cord from his pocket, and we dragged him to the cab, the case secure. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the papers on the table alongside the handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the new note, the pin, the journal, and the old ledger. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a victory. Watson, the cipher, GDA 18 spelled Lyle, the thief. RS, Robert Stone, the old stagehand, killed Eleanor to protect him. I leaned over the table, my mind racing. Lyle hired Stone, but is he the only one? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the papers. Lyle's the mastermind, but Dutton's jealousy and Henley's silence made it possible. We'll bring Stone to Scotland Yard and Lyle will face justice. He plucked the violin's third string, the note sharp and triumphant. Eleanor's final note has played, Watson. Her truth is sung. The fog pressed against the windows, the city a whisper beyond. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, now healed by truth. As Holmes studied the papers, I felt the case close, its shadows banished, the orchestra's secret laid bare. Chapter 20. The curtain falls. The fog over Baker Street had begun to lift, revealing the faint glow of gas lamps and the soft clatter of London's morning streets. Inside 221B, the air was still heavy with the lingering scent of pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty odor of old books stacked in their usual chaos. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, my pen poised over pages filled with the details of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked Betrayer, Lyle's notebook, with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, the scarf pin, Samuel Reed's journal, the old ledger exposing Lyle's theft, and the papers recovered from Robert Stone, the man in the red scarf. Each clue had been a note in a deadly symphony now resolved, but the echoes lingered. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, the recovered papers in his hand, his sharp eyes scanning the ledgers as if to ensure no secret remained hidden. The violin lay on the table, its polished wood catching the morning light, a silent tribute to Eleanor's courage. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice calm but firm. "A curtain falls. But the stage is never truly empty. Robert Stone is in custody, his confession tying him to the cyanide and the violin's papers, but Charles Lyle, the orchestrator, must face justice. Eleanor's cipher, GDA 18, named him, and her death demands we finish this." He set the papers down, his fingers steady, his mind already planning the final act. A knock broke the quiet, sharp and official. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face less pale than usual, her hands folded neatly. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade's here. Says it's urgent. He's got men with him." Her voice carried a hint of excitement, and I felt a surge of anticipation. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show him in." A moment later, Inspector Lestrade strode into the room, his coat dusted with fog, his face a mix of grim determination and reluctant admiration. Behind him were two constables, their uniforms crisp, their eyes alert. "Holmes, Watson," Lestrade said, his voice brisk. "We've got Stone locked up at Scotland Yard. He's talking. Says Lyle hired him to silence. Miss Vance paid him to steal those papers from her violin. But Lyle's slippery claims he's innocent, says Stone's lying. We need you at the concert hall. Lyle's there and he's not coming quietly." His eyes flicked to the papers on the table and he nodded. "Those ledgers. Damning if they're real." Holmes picked up the papers, his lips twitching in a faint smile. "They're real, Lestrade, and they'll hang Lyle. Let's end this." He grabbed his coat, the music sheets, the treatise, the violin case, and the key evidence. Lyle's notebook, the payment list, the unsigned letter, and the ledgers. To the concert hall. The cab rattled through the thinning fog. The city, waking in shades of gray and gold. The Royal Concert Hall loomed ahead, its pillars gleaming under the morning sun, a grand facade hiding a sordid truth. Inside, the stage was silent, the air heavy with the memory of Eleanor's final note. Lestrade led us to Lyle's office, where Charles Lyle stood behind his desk, his face pale, his hands clenched. His fine suit was rumpled, his eyes darting, like a trapped animal's. A small crowd of orchestra members, Dutton, Henley, and others hovered near the door, their faces a mix of shock and fear. "Holmes," Lyle said, his voice tight. "This is nonsense. Stone's a liar, a thief. I never hired him, never touched those papers. You've got no proof." His hands gestured wildly, knocking a baton to the floor. Holmes stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp. "Lyle, your lies are as thin as your ledger's ink. These papers," he held up the ledgers from Stone's case, "detail your theft of orchestra funds, 10 years ago and beyond. Eleanor found proof, hid it in her violin's bridge, and paid with her life. He spread the evidence on the desk, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter, the note placing Stone in the alley. Stone confessed. You hired him to poison Eleanor, to steal her papers, to bury your scandal. Lyle's face drained of color, his hands shaking. No, I didn't. Dutton, he was jealous, always scheming. Or Henley, she hated Eleanor's. Solos. His voice rose, desperate. But the orchestra members stepped back, their eyes hard. Holmes held up the music sheet, the numbers 3, 7, 12 glaring in the light. Eleanor's cipher, GDA 18, spelled your name, Lyle. She knew your secret, confronted you in her dressing room, and you sent Stone to silence her. The cyanide, the handkerchief, the secret passage. They're all your work. His eyes bored into Lyle's, unyielding. Lestrade stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting. Charles Lyle, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Vance and theft from the Royal Concert Hall. The constables moved in, but Lyle lunged for the door, shoving past Dutton. Holmes was faster, tripping him with a swift move, and Lyle fell, his face hitting the floor. As the constables cuffed him, Lyle glared at Holmes, his voice a snarl. You think this ends it? Others knew, others wanted her gone. His words hung in the air, but Lestrade dragged him out, the orchestra members parting silently. Holmes turned to me, his eyes calm but tired. Watson, Lyle's the mastermind, but his words hint at complicity. Dutton's jealousy, Henley's silence. They played their parts, if only by inaction. We questioned the orchestra briefly, but most claimed ignorance, their faces pale. Clara Henley admitted in a whisper that she'd suspected Lyle's theft but feared speaking out. Edward Dutton, tight-lipped, said nothing, his eyes cold. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the clues on the table one last time. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music. Fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the note, the pin, the journal, the ledgers, and the papers. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a farewell. Watson, the curtain has fallen. Eleanor's papers exposed Lyle's theft, and her cipher named him. Stone's cyanide, the scarf, the passage. They were tools of his greed. I leaned over the table, my mind heavy. But Lyle's words, others wanted her gone. Could there be more? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the violin. Possible, but the evidence points to Lyle and Stone. The orchestra's shadows, Dutton, Henley, may hide guilt, but not murder. Eleanor's truth is enough. He plucked the violin's third string, the note soft and mournful. Her music, lives, Watson, in justice. We visited Eleanor's aunt, Clara Vance, later that day, delivering the violin and the news of Lyle's arrest. Her tears fell, but she smiled, clutching the locket with Eleanor's portrait. She was brave, she said, her voice steady. Thank you. The fog was gone, the city alive with sound. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, now healed by truth. As Holmes set the violin in its case, I felt the case close, its secrets laid bare, the orchestra stage silent at last. Chapter 21. Echoes of the violin. The morning sun broke through the last wisps of fog over Baker Street, casting a soft golden glow on the gas lamps and filling the air with the lively clatter of London's waking streets. Inside 221B, the familiar scent of pipe smoke mingled with the faint tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench, and the musty odor of old books stacked in their usual disarray. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook open, its pages now a complete chronicle of Eleanor Vance's murder. The Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, Lyle's notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, the scarf pin, Samuel Reed's journal, the old ledger exposing Charles Lyle's theft, and the papers recovered from Robert Stone, the man in the red scarf. Each clue had been a note in a haunting melody, now played to its end, yet the echoes lingered in my mind. Sherlock Holmes stood by the window, the violin in its case on the table, his sharp eyes fixed on the bustling street below, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and reflective. "A case ends, but its echoes shape the future." Eleanor Vance's courage exposed a scandal. And though Lyle and Stone face justice, the orchestra's shadows, Dutton, Henley, and others, leave questions. Her violin still speaks. He turned, his fingers brushing the case, a rare softness in his gaze. A knock broke the quiet, gentle but purposeful. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face brighter than in recent days, her hands holding a folded newspaper. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a lady's here. Says she's from the concert hall. She's brought something for you, and she's smiling for once." Her voice carried warmth, and I felt a stir of curiosity. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show her. In." A moment later, Lillian Gray, the young violinist who had been Eleanor's friend, stepped into the room. Her dark hair was neatly pinned, her face no longer shadowed by grief but lit with a quiet resolve. She carried a small, polished wooden box, its surface carved with delicate musical notes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lillian said, her voice steady. "I'm here on behalf of the orchestra, or what's left of it. After Mr. Lyle's arrest, we've been rebuilding, trying to honor Eleanor. This is for you." She set the box on the table, opening it to reveal a single, pristine sheet of music handwritten titled Eleanor's Lament. The notes were simple but haunting, with no numbers in the margins, only a dedication. "For Eleanor Vance, whose music lives on." I leaned forward, my heart tightening. "You wrote this, Miss Gray?" Lillian nodded, her eyes glistening. "With help from the others, those who cared for her. We found some of her unfinished scores in the hall, pieces she'd been working on. We finished it to play at a memorial concert tomorrow. We want you both there to see her legacy." She paused, her hands clasping. "The orchestra's different now. Mr. Dutton's left, shamed by his jealousy. Miss Henley's quieter, helping us heal. We're starting fresh because of Eleanor." Holmes took the sheet, his eyes scanning the notes. "A fitting tribute, Miss Gray. Did you find anything else among her scores? Any more ciphers or hints of others involved?" His tone was gentle, but his mind never rested. Lillian shook her head. "No ciphers, just her music. She was careful, hid the truth in those numbers you decoded. But I heard whispers. Some patrons, rich men who backed Lyle, knew about the theft. They're gone now, left the city after the trial started. Maybe they were afraid." Her voice hardened, then softened. "Thank you for giving her justice." Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Her courage made it possible, Miss Gray. We'll be at the concert." Lillian nodded, her smile warm, and left, her footsteps light on the stairs. Holmes turned. To me, the music sheet in hand. "Watson, the orchestra's secret is laid bare, but Lyle's patrons, those rich shadows, escaped. They funded his theft, perhaps urged Eleanor's death, but the evidence points only to him and Stone." He set the sheet down, his eyes distant. "Justice is served, yet not complete." We visited Scotland Yard later that day, where Inspector Lestrade shared the latest. Robert Stone had confessed fully, detailing how Lyle hired him a decade ago to cover the theft, then again to kill Eleanor when she uncovered the ledgers. Stone's cyanide, hidden in the vial on stage, was meant to look like an accident, the handkerchief planted to confuse. Lyle's trial was underway, his denials crumbling, under the weight of the papers, ledgers, and Stone's testimony. "You've done it again, Holmes," Lestrade said grudgingly. "But those patrons Lillian mentioned, no trace. They're too clever, or too rich." Back at Baker Street, I spread the clues on the table one final time. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle. The alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the note, the pin, the journal, the ledgers, the papers, and now Eleanor's lament. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a memory. Watson, Eleanor's violin was her voice, and her cipher, GDA18, was her cry. Lyle and Stone fell, but the patron's escape is a bitter note. I leaned over the table, my mind heavy. Could we find them, Holmes? Those patrons? Holmes exhaled, his eyes on the violin case. Perhaps, but the trail is cold, and Eleanor's justice is enough for now. Her music lives in that concert, in Lillian's resolve. He picked up the violin, plucking the third string, the note soft and clear. Her echoes remain, Watson, in every note. The next evening we attended the memorial concert at the Royal Concert Hall. The stage glowed under soft lights, the orchestra smaller but united. Lillian led, her violin singing Eleanor's lament, its melody soaring, mournful yet hopeful. Clara Vance sat in the front row, her locket gleaming, her eyes bright with pride. The audience was silent, moved, and I felt Eleanor's presence in every note. As we left, the city was alive, the fog gone, the stars sharp above. Eleanor Vance's death was a wound, now a scar, her legacy a melody that would not fade. Holmes walked beside me, his step light, his mind already turning to the next mystery. "Write this one well, Watson," he said, his voice soft. "Her music deserves it." Chapter 22. The silent strings, the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of 221B Baker Street, painting the room in warm hues of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the fog that had cloaked London for weeks. The air was lighter now, carrying only a faint trace of pipe smoke, the sharp tang of chemicals from Holmes's workbench subdued, and the familiar musty scent of old books stacked in their chaotic piles. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook closed for the first time in days, its pages filled with the saga of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18, the cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer. Lyle's a notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, the scarf pin, Samuel Reed's journal, the old ledger exposing Charles Lyle's theft, the papers, recovered from Robert Stone, and the haunting score of Eleanor's lament played at her memorial. Each clue had been a string on a violin, now silent, its melody resolved, yet the case lingered in my heart like a soft, persistent echo. Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, his long fingers tracing the edge of the violin case, his sharp eyes distant, fixed on some unseen horizon. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and thoughtful. "A violin's strings fall silent, but their vibrations linger in the wood. Eleanor Vance's case is closed, Lyle in chains, Stone confessing, her truth sung. But its echoes stir the mind. The patrons who fled, the orchestra's silent complicity, they remind us justice is a fragile note." He turned, his gaze meeting mine, a rare flicker of introspection in his eyes. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the case settling. "Holmes, do you think we missed something? Those patrons Lillian mentioned, could they strike again?" The thought had nagged at me since the concert, the shadow of wealthy men who'd backed Lyle's theft and vanished into London's underbelly. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Possible, Watson, but their trail is cold, their influence severed with Lyle's fall. They're cowards hiding behind gold, not bold enough to face us directly. Yet the mind hungers for the chase, doesn't it?" He moved to the table, picking up Eleanor's lament, its notes a tribute to a woman whose courage had outshone her killers. A knock broke the quiet, soft but deliberate. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face calm, her hands holding a small sealed envelope. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a boy delivered this. Said it's from Scotland Yard. He ran off before I could ask more." Her voice was steady, and she handed the envelope to Holmes before slipping out. Holmes opened it, revealing a brief note in Inspector Lestrade's scrawl. "Holmes, Lyle's talking. Says a patron, one Lord Harwood, funded the theft. Knew of Eleanor's death. No proof, and Harwood's left for Paris. Thought you'd want to know. Lestrade." A second sheet, tucked inside, was a copy of a telegram from Paris, confirming Harwood's arrival, his estate untouchable by English law. Holmes handed me the note, his eyes narrowing. "Lord Harwood, a name, Watson, but no more. Lyle's last barb, perhaps, or a truth we can't yet touch. The patron's shadows stretch far, but Eleanor's justice stands." He set the note down, his fingers brushing the violin case. "This case tested us, Watson. Her cipher, GDA18, was a masterpiece. Her bravery a light in the fog." I read the note again, frustration stirring. "Harwood escapes, then? It doesn't sit right, Holmes. Eleanor deserved better." Holmes nodded, his voice soft. "She did, and her legacy endures. Lillian's orchestra, Clara Vance's pride, the music that fills the hall. Harwood's day may come, but not today." He moved to the window, looking out at the bustling street. "The world spins on, Watson, and new mysteries call." We spent the evening sorting the case's relics, a ritual to close the chapter. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the note, the pin, the journal, the ledgers, the papers, all were catalogued, ready for my eventual account. Eleanor's lament remained on the table, a reminder of her voice. Holmes took the violin from its case, examining the bridge where her secrets had been hidden, then set it down gently. "Will you play it?" I asked, half expecting him to refuse. Holmes rarely played another's instrument, but Eleanor's Stradivarius seemed to call to him. He hesitated, then lifted the violin, tucking it under his chin. His bow drew across the strings, a slow, mournful note rising. Not Eleanor's lament, but a piece of his own. A quiet reflection of loss and triumph. The music filled the room, soft but piercing, and I saw for a moment the weight he carried. The cases solved, the truths uncovered, the shadows that escaped. The final note lingered, then faded, and he lowered the violin, his eyes meeting mine. "Write her story, Watson," he said, his voice steady. "Let her strings sing for those who read it." He returned the violin to its case, his movements careful, almost reverent. The next morning we received a visitor, Clara Vance, Eleanor's aunt, her face softer now, her locket gleaming. She brought a small gift, a framed photograph of Eleanor, playing her violin, her eyes bright with passion. "For your help," she said, her voice warm. "She'd want you to have it." Holmes accepted it with a rare smile, placing it on the mantel, where it caught the light beside his own violin. Clara left. A telegram arrived, its message brief but sharp. A theft at the British Museum, artifacts missing, a cipher left behind. Holmes's eyes lit up, the hunger for the chase returning. "The game is afoot, Watson," he said, his voice alive. "Eleanor's strings are silent, but London's mysteries play on." The city hummed beyond the windows, its pulse quickening. Eleanor Vance's death was a scar, her legacy a melody that would endure. As Holmes reached for his coat, I felt the past settle, the future stirring, the silent strings of 221B ready for the next song. Chapter 23. A New Melody. The early evening light filtered through the windows of 221B Baker Street, casting long, golden rays across the room and softening the familiar clutter. The air held a faint trace of pipe smoke, the lingering tang of chemicals, from Holmes's workbench now quiet, and the comforting musty scent of old books stacked in their usual disarray. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the table, my notebook resting beside a steaming cup of tea, its pages a complete record of Eleanor Vance's murder, the Stradivarius with its hidden bridge compartment, the coded music sheets with numbers 3, 7, 12, 6, 5, 11, 17, and 18. The cyanide-stained handkerchief found in my bag, the red silk scrap from the costume room, the second vial, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the brass key, the secret passage, the torn paper marked betrayer, Lyle's notebook with its RS, payment, the recital folder, the payment list to RS, the unsigned letter ordering Eleanor's silencing, the note placing RS in the alley, the scarf pin, Samuel Reed's journal, the old ledger exposing Charles Lyle's theft, the papers, recovered from Robert Stone, the memorial score Eleanor's lament, and the fleeting mention of Lord Harwood's escape to Paris. Each clue had been a note in a complex symphony, now resolved, yet its melody lingered like a soft hum in my soul. Sherlock Holmes stood by the mantel, where Eleanor's framed photograph rested beside his violin, his sharp eyes softened by the light, his fingers idly tracing the edge of a new telegram. The Stradivarius, returned to Clara Vance, was gone, but its presence seemed to echo in the room. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and contemplative. "A melody ends, but its notes inspire new songs. Eleanor Vance's courage reshaped the orchestra, exposed a thief and left a mark on us. Yet London's pulse beats on, and new mysteries hum beneath its surface." He held up the telegram, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The game never stops." A knock broke the quiet, gentle but eager. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face warm with a rare smile, her hands holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a young lady's here, says she's from the orchestra. She's brought a gift and she's got news." Her voice carried a spark of excitement and I felt a stir of anticipation. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Show her in." A moment later, Lillian Gray entered, her violin case slung over her shoulder, her face radiant with purpose. Her dark hair was loose, her eyes bright, and she carried herself with a confidence that had grown since we last saw her. She set the parcel on the table, her hands steady. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lillian said, her voice clear and strong. "I came to thank you again, and to share something. The orchestra's thriving now thanks to Eleanor's legacy. We've named a scholarship in her honor for young violinists, funded by the hall's new patrons, honest ones." She smiled, unwrapping the parcel to reveal a small, leather-bound book, its cover embossed with a violin. "This is a collection of Eleanor's compositions found in her flat. We're publishing it, and we want you to have the first copy." I took the book, my fingers tracing the title, Melodies of Eleanor Vance. The pages were filled with her scores, some familiar from the memorial, others new, each note a piece of her soul. "This is beautiful, Miss Gray," I said, my voice thick. "She'd be proud." Lillian nodded, her eyes glistening. "She is, I think, wherever she is. The concert was a turning point. Clara Vance is helping us, teaching young players, keeping Eleanor's spirit alive." She paused, her voice lowering. "I heard about Lord Harwood, the patron who fled. Some say he's untouchable, but I found this among Eleanor's things." She pulled a small folded letter from her pocket, its seal broken, and handed it to Holmes. Holmes unfolded it, his eyes scanning the text. It was from Eleanor, dated a week before her death, addressed to a solicitor. "If I'm harmed, seek Lord Harwood. He funds Lyle's theft, knows the truth. My papers prove it." A second sheet listed dates and payments, linking Harwood to Lyle's ledgers, though not enough for a conviction. Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smile. "Miss Gray, this is valuable, though Harwood's in Paris, beyond our reach, for now. Did you show this to anyone?" Lillian shook her head. "Only you. I trust you to use it if the time comes. The orchestra's clean now, but I wanted you to know Eleanor saw it all." Her voice was firm, her resolve a mirror of Eleanor's courage. Holmes nodded, slipping the letter into his pocket. "You've honored her well, Miss Gray. We'll keep this safe, and Harwood's name won't be forgotten." Lillian smiled, her mission complete, and left, her violin case swinging lightly, her steps full of hope. Holmes turned to me, the letter in hand. Watson, Eleanor's reach extends beyond her grave. Harwood's shadow lingers, a case for another day. But her scholarship, her music, they're her victory, her. He moved to the table where Eleanor's lament still lay, its notes a quiet reminder. The cipher, GDA 18, was her final gift, naming Lyle, guiding us to justice. I leaned back, the book in my hands. Do you think Harwood will return, Holmes, or others like him? Holmes's eyes flickered with the old hunger. Men like Harwood always return, Watson, drawn to power like moths to flame. We'll be ready. He picked up the telegram from earlier, its message brief. A ciphered theft at the British Museum. Suspects unknown. Scotland Yard baffled. But for now, a new melody calls. We spent the evening organizing the case's relics, a ritual to seal its end. The handkerchief, the red silk, the vials, the letter to Lyle, the alley note, the key, the torn paper, the music fragments, Lyle's notebook, the recital folder, the payment list, the unsigned letter, the note, the pin, the journal, the ledgers, the papers, and now Eleanor's letter about Harwood were filed away, ready for my account. The book of her compositions joined them, a treasure to revisit. Holmes stood by the mantel, where Eleanor's photograph caught the light, her smile a quiet strength. Will, you write it soon? Holmes asked, his voice soft, glancing at my notebook. Her story deserves the world. I nodded, my pen already itching. I will, Holmes. Every note, every clue. She won't be forgotten. I looked at the photograph, feeling her presence, her music, a thread woven into our lives. The next morning, a letter arrived from Clara Vance, brief but heartfelt. The scholarship's first student plays Eleanor's violin, her notes alive. Again, thank you. Enclosed was a small pressed flower, a violet, like one Eleanor wore in her hair. Holmes placed it in the book, a silent tribute. As the day unfolded, Holmes pored over the museum theft, his mind racing with ciphers and shadows. I watched him, the fire of the chase in his eyes, and knew Eleanor's case had changed us. Her, courage a spark, her music a guide. The city hummed beyond the windows, its mysteries waiting. Eleanor Vance's death was a scar, her legacy a song, and 221B was ready for the next melody.